graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and the School for Social Research in New York City. He also taught in Social Sciences Department at Hostels Community College of the City University of New York. He pursued further studies in general theoretical psychology at Fordham University of New York City. He has authored a series of articles and books, one being an exceptionally well-written book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. He has also taught a dynamic 5-week course on self-hatred. He is currently the co-owner of the Harlem Graphics near the Apollo Theater, located in New York. On my personal consideration, I like to say that he shines like God daily, since he speaks the truth and expels falsehood through his wisdom. He has given us strength to continue our struggle in this foreign land, which our ancestors were forced to come to. May the radiant light that he is blessed with never diminish. May his righteousness endure. May his righteousness be for eternity, for it endures. Its worth is real and will lead him to blessedness. What more can be said that he is part of a never-ending African tradition? Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Amos Wilson.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It's good to see you here again today and to see your concern about the continuance and the survival of our people. I'm going to talk a bit about economics. Of course, I do not claim to be an economist, nor a person who's heavily versed in business. In fact, I think one of the major issues we have to confront in this, in our present set of circumstances, is that while we have done a good deal to rediscover our history and, of course, to highlight our history, and there's a good deal of information concerning our bodies, melanin, and so forth, I think we need to broaden the themes of the kind of education we are giving in the community. And one of the things we have to do is that, of course, is broaden our theme around economics. We need a person, as we have some very distinguished people in history and anthropology and education and other areas who've spoken to us on many occasions. I think in addition, we need someone of stature, someone whom we respect, to speak to us continuously about economic development and economic realities. There is a major question as to our survival as a people into the 21st century. And as you can see, the title here, African American People Facing the 21st Century. Are we ready? It is a very, very pertinent question. While we have duly and rightfully emphasized our history, we should continue to do so. We must also be futuristic in our orientation. Thank you. And plan for the future. Think not only in terms of the next few years, but in terms of the next 100 years or so. In about a month or two, we'll be talking about, of course, the greatness of our people, and we'll celebrate that greatness of our people. But we must remember, we must not forget that great peoples and their civilizations were and are based on great economic systems. Too often, I think when we discuss the greatness of our people, we put a great deal of emphasis on spirituality, as we should, and the emphasis there is certainly right in many ways. But But I think sometimes we forget that greatness is more than merely the gods we worship. You see, that, and I say somewhat facetiously, that I have yet to see a god build a temple. We talk about Egyptian temples and so forth, or build any building. Buildings are built by people. And buildings are not just built by a spiritual impulse alone. There has to be an economic, social system that's the basis and foundation for buildings to take place. So when we talk about the greatness of our people and our civilizations, we must remember those civilizations were also based on great economic systems. They were based on effective control over some vital resources. So when we talk about the empires of Ghana, Mali, and so forth, we see them having some control over salt or gold or some other resource that was needed and that was used by other people and traded with in terms of other people. And therefore, you'll see the civilizations built around the control or influence on vital resources. When you talk about the building of great cities and so forth, we have to recognize that great cities and great philosophical systems and great religious systems and so forth come into being when agriculture has now become controlled by people, when there's enough surplus food produced for people to have time to engage in philosophical discourse and thought and writing and development of art and skills and other kinds of things. When there's enough agricultural surplus so that vast armies of people who build pyramids and build great temples and build cities can be fed, so that the people who supervise them are paid and fed. The people who build these great civilizations and administer these great civilizations must ultimately be fed from the surpluses produced by these civilizations. If we're going to talk then about the future greatness of black people and of African people, then we cannot talk about that without talking about the building of an economic substructure. It is not going to be built merely by worshiping ancestors. It's not going to be built merely by recognizing our past greatness, or merely by just knowing ourselves. All of those things are key ingredients. Don't get me wrong. However, we also have to recognize that we've got to get down to the nuts and bolts of an economic system. So then, the great civilizations of our people were built on great economic systems, effective control over some vital resources, and some conducive social political organization. And I'll talk in a minute about the fact that an economy is not just the presence of money. That the ultimate foundation of an economy is the nature of the relationship between people. In fact, you can have an economy without money. Economies were present and were enormously influential before money in the form that we use it came into being. So we must recognize ultimately that an economic system is a system of human relations. And so when we talk about our great civilizations, we must see that you are talking about civilizations that had systems, had social and political systems, and systems of human relations that made their greatness apparent. So these systems must contain then compatible social political organizations and self-esteem, self-confidence, self-love, self-acceptance, courage, vision, daring, and leadership. The having of an economy, of course, it enhances the quality of life for people, enhances our possibilities for survival. Not just, the economy just does not just keep us alive, but actually makes our dreams, makes it possible for our dreams to come true and to create the kind of world we would like to create. You hear a lot of talk about AIDS, for instance. And unfortunately, I think a great deal of the talk does not touch on how that is related to economics. We talk about the people who, through some conspiracy, created AIDS in the laboratory, and who perhaps have unleashed AIDS upon the African community. And we may talk about the nature of AIDS and talk about safe sex and so forth, and all of those things are important. But we must recognize that there is an economic component related to AIDS. That if AIDS is a form of germ warfare, then it signals to us the future, that our people may perish not so much in terms of laser beams coming from 400 or 500 miles out in space, or various exotic weapons that the result of Star Wars and our inability to fight wars in space to defend our interest, but that future warfare may be silent, and it may be relatively slow, and may be in the form of diseases like AIDS or other types that are unleashed and slowly and over periods of years, or maybe within a very short period of time, destroy the people without a shot being fired. Of course, when we look at the history of the Indian in the Western Hemisphere, we see that history of where thousands and thousands of people were destroyed through the use of germs. This means then that warfare in the future may not be carried out through the use of artillery and jet planes and so forth, but will be carried out through the use of intellect and research. We cannot fight AIDS by firing guns and weapons. We cannot fight AIDS by jet planes and laser beams in space. We have to fight AIDS through medical research. We have to fight AIDS through the organization of a medical delivery system. That means then we have to develop the intellectual power. We have to develop the institutional power to struggle against a germ warfare attack. That means a group of professors and researchers and others fighting a war in their laboratories, so that when a disease is released upon their population, they must then use their scientific knowledge and resources and institutions to develop a preventative against that disease. Not only must they develop the preventative, they must then have a system in place by which the preventative is distributed. It's not enough that you have a cure for a disease. You must also have an economic, social, and political system that sees to it that the cure is distributed among the population. Right now, what is not even a cure for the disease of AIDS, AZT, will cost you over $10,000 a year to administer. So the mere discovery of a preventative for AIDS still does not mean that that preventative will be adequately distributed among the population. And therefore you need an economic system and a distribution system so that when and if a preventative is discovered, it can be adequately distributed among the population and across classes. It means then, in this instance, that blacks, we as African people, need our own world-class universities. The white universities are not going to function for us. Merely having knowledge is not going to function for us. Now, tomorrow afternoon, I'll be talking to, at the African Portrait Theater, we'll talk about education a bit, because I want to sort of attack this concept where we tend to think, I believe, that the mere accumulation of knowledge is going to be enough to bring about the salvation of our people. And knowledge is not enough. Just as I said earlier, money is not enough. Money is not an economic system. Knowledge is not a salvation system if the knowledge is not systematized and coordinated and used and distributed according to some plan and organized in a systematic fashion. So to educate a bunch of black boys and African boys and girls in terms of scientific knowledge, and yet not have scientific laboratories, you see, and not have universities available so that they can use their brains to save the people, means that we will die with knowledge in our heads. We have a great fund of knowledge as African Americans right now. And we have a greater fund of knowledge as African Americans than many nations have right at this point. But the knowledge is not organized in a way and in our interest. For us to fight a disease then like AIDS, it would not only be enough that we have people who know medicine and who know how to do medical research, we have to supply them with the medical institutes and with the resources. But to supply them with the institutes and resources, we have to have an economic system that pays for those institutes and resources. It's not enough then just to learn mathematics and science. We have to have a place for our youngsters to work and have that work be productive for us as a people. So when we talk about economics, we're not just talking about ways people can earn more money and have better housing and move from one social position to another. And we're not just talking about increasing people's consumption and so forth as is normally projected. We are talking about the pure, raw reality of biological survival. The ability to live and continue to live and continue to keep our gene pool alive. So economics is not merely about the exotic beauty of owning something, but it's about staying alive. And the African economic situation is such that there are questions being asked about our ability to survive as African people. And this is centered around the economic system. Economics is about life itself. I read something here, no doubt some of you saw it the other day. Life expectancy for blacks dropped 2 years in a row. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we are dying, and we're beginning to die at a younger age. And this has to do with economics and other things. Let me just indulge me for a minute. Let me read some of these quotes here because I think it's a very important thing. For the first time in this century, the life expectancy of blacks in the United States has declined in 2 successive years, while that for whites has continued to increase, according to a report from the National Center for Health Statistics. Blacks who are naturally endowed to live longer than whites, by the way. You talk about this melanin. One of the advantages of melanin is the lengthening of life. And it's been very clear. When blacks live beyond the so-called average age of blacks, they live longer than whites. So if we lived healthily and lived in the manner that we should, we would naturally live longer than whites. So you have an unnatural situation going on here. Now, instead of the lifespan increasing, it's beginning to regress. This is serious, the researchers say. If you're looking for the big factors, they are homicides and accidents. But those things, of course, are tied into economics. Recently, there has been a tremendous increase in homicides among both young whites and blacks, but it has hit blacks harder, with a 15% increase in homicides among blacks for 1985 and 1986, compared with a 5% increase among whites. When we talk about self-hatred, we talk about hatred. Hatred is just not an attitude or a feeling. It is a behavioral orientation. Hatred expresses itself through destruction. And of course, that's the signature of hatred. When you see destruction and diminishment and deterioration taking place in human relations and in human life, you can be certain that hatred is existent and operating, even when it parades as love, which it often does. If we say that hatred is counterproductive and against life it is destructive, which it is, and love, of course, enhances life and is about development and growth, then hatred expresses itself in the world through destroying the world, through destroying its environment. think a minute, if hatred does that in terms of its environment and in terms of the world, what then must self-hatred do? Hatred does not stop its work simply because it is contained within the personality. It continues. If hatred strikes outside, because that is its nature, then when it is lodged within the personality, it still strikes its host. In other words, then, an individual who is caught up in self-hatred is also caught up in self-destruction. They are simultaneously the same thing. And if you internalize racism, as too many of us have, and we internalize racism from a people who hate, then we come to hate ourselves, then we come to do the work of those people. We actually commit suicide and death in service of whites. If whites wish for us to die and do not wish to kill us directly as they do, we will also help them by engaging in self-hatred activities. And this is what self-hatred is. In other words, we literally make ourselves sick because they want us to be sick. When we take in their attitudes do the work inside of our bodies and inside of our minds. And so when we talk about homicides and murders and so forth, you see then a people who are busy killing themselves in service of the status quo. I often have said in my classes that the reason why black men kill each other so much is because we have not yet decided to kill white men. And that's ultimately what it's about. We have not yet decided to undertake the challenge to overthrow white power.
Right. Yeah.
When you talk about racism, and we often talk about racism without talking about the people who perpetrate it, and going to the ultimate logical conclusion, which is the annihilation of the people who perpetrated, or at least the neutralization of the people who perpetrated. Of course, we don't want to talk about that too much because it involves the concept of war and actual confrontation. But frankly speaking, you can't seriously talk about getting economic control of yourself unless you're ready to go to war with whites. You may as well face that reality. Maybe that's the reason why we've stayed away from economics for so long. But if we don't then deal with economics, then we have to deal with our own self-destruction. If we don't decide to kill the white man by various other ways, we are going to kill ourselves. This is a part of what we call loving the aggressor in a way that's self-destructive. Where the individual, because he is afraid to attack his source of frustration, attacks himself or attacks an innocent target. We then must recognize that we are destroying our lives because we haven't decided, as George Scott, when he was playing the part of Patton, said, it's not so much, in essence, that we are going to die for our country. We are going to make what? The other ones die for it. Okay? So it's not so much we're going to kill ourselves and we're willing to throw our lives on the line. No, make the other ones who are causing the problems pay for it with their lives instead of ours. Auto accidents also hit the two populations differently in those years, with an 8% rise in deaths among blacks and a 4% rise among whites. Deaths from AIDS, as well as some other diseases such as pneumonia and tuberculosis. And notice tuberculosis is what has been called a disease of poverty. It's very much related and correlated with poverty. And here is the thing that we thought we'd gotten rid of 30, 40 years ago, and we're starting talking about it now. Of course, that's because we're again, of course, experiencing poverty going back into it. Also have increased disproportionately among blacks in recent years. So here we are dealing with tuberculosis again, which implies, of course, then economic deterioration increasing to such a degree that it is being reflected in disease. and our people becoming diseased. Some officials attributed part of the problem to economic policies of the Reagan administration. We're right back at it again, you see. A part of our miseducation in these universities and colleges is the segmentation of knowledge and this business of specialization that we are caught up into. And I've tried to admonish black scholars again and again about this narrow kind of education and about accepting white definitions of who and what they are professionally. And recognizing that we as black scholars have to, of necessity, be more broadly educated and have a much broader vision than white scholars. We cannot let white scholars and professionals define our roles. The roles we are to play as black people and as professionals or whatever we are must be defined within the context of our lives as people and of our reality. I've spoken to someone about, I've seen some black teachers define themselves as 9th grade teachers, 7th grade teachers. You know, not teachers of people, they're just teaching the 7th grade. In other words, teaching an abstraction. And because their students who enter their rooms are not at the 9th grade level or the 7th grade level, they feel insulted. You know, I didn't come here to teach kindergarten, I'm a 9th grade teacher, but you don't have anything. Why is that 9th grade? You have people. You have students who need to be taught. You redefine who you are and what you're about and get on with the business of teaching. But too many who've accepted the definition given them by their white colleagues, you see, become frustrated, angry, hostile, and resentful, and create and maintain the problem that they're complaining about. And so when we, and I'm saying this because you can study diseases in a medicinal sense and deal with it in terms of medicines and herbs and this and that. But you must recognize that diseases, like anything else in life, also have a political side. And that diseases are produced by political, economic, social factors. Diseases that flow from radiation, that flow from pollution, that flow from being located in the worst parts of town, that flow from poor medical practices and so forth, are diseases that flow from economic, political, and social realities. And often many of the diseases that have so-called been conquered in the history of mankind have not been conquered in terms of drugs and medicine, but have been conquered in terms of political and social reorganization, have been conquered in terms of sanitation practices, not vaccines. When London was a pigsty, just a cesspool of disease, where people were throwing their excrement and urine right out the window, right onto the streets, and so forth. Of course, you see, you don't see that on Channel 13 with people with all these nice gowns and stuff, right? All this has been forgotten. You don't recognize that those kings and queens used to crap right in there, right on the floors, in corners, and places like that. And these people hated baths and hated things like that. These things are not told, and we're talking about things that really only disappeared maybe a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah, they leave that out of humanity.
Yeah, very much so. And it's not dealt with, and the history is solid. And these diseases and plagues were produced by political, social organizations. At last then, when swamps were cleared and sewers were built and streets and things were reorganized, disease was then reduced. Which indicated then it was not the medicines, but the political, social, economic organizations that had impact on diseases and helped to remove diseases and plagues. And this is the thing we have to recognize. This is one of the reasons why the medical system in this country and other nations will work against the interests of black people because they're too narrow. And their lives, of course, depends upon the presence of disease and, in a sense, the maintenance of disease, which is one of the reasons why often people who are educated in medicine are not educated in politics. And I tell black professionals again and again, Teaching does not occur merely in the classroom. Social work does not occur merely at the social work institution or at your particular job location. If you are not involved in political change as a black professional or black worker, you are not fully doing your job. Because it's the politics and the political structure that is often the cause of problems that on the face of it appear to be quite different from social problems and issues. Where you live and how you live will determine to a good degree the incidence of disease. And where you live and how you live, of course, will to a good extent depend upon your economic system and the political system. Right. And here then you see in this article, despite the first opening of it, you find the life expectancy shortening, the increase in suicides, increase in homicides, and yet, right at the bottom here it says what? Some officials attributed part of the problem to what? To economic policies of the Reagan administration, which they said have increased homelessness, which is a case for disease and destruction. Cut aid and health care to the poor. As I told you earlier, it's not enough just to have medicines to cure diseases. You must have the appropriate social, political, and other vehicles that deliver those things that fight diseases. And when you then cut Medicaid, Medicare, you cut medical facilities and so forth, you're giving people death sentences. And the medicines are there, but the medicines are not being made available to the people for one reason or other. Either they are not affordable, or either these systems and institutions are not there to deliver them. And otherwise, hurt blacks proportionate. It is the first time since 1962 that the life expectancy for any race has declined 2 years in a row, and the only time in this century that the life expectancy for blacks dropped while the figures for whites rose. So what do we have going on here, ladies and gentlemen? This research has stated that while the increase in life expectancy among blacks are generally more precarious, because there are many causes of death that are not being overcome as rapidly for blacks as for whites. Thus, it is easier for adverse changes to reverse a slight upward trend. It first states tuberculosis, which is thought to be rising because of damage to immune systems caused by acquired immune deficiency syndrome, increased among blacks by 8.5%, while it dropped among whites by 3% in 1985 and 86. So we see tuberculosis on the increase, some 8.5% among our people, and having to do to damage to the immune system. Because we know that the AIDS virus, in a sense, the damage caused by the AIDS virus is not so much its own by the very nature of that virus, but it's what it does to the system. In that it destroys the system and it damages the immune system to such a degree that minor diseases, which would normally be overcome, now overcome the system. When you're talking about then people who are malnutritioned or people who are under what we call even psychological stress, one of the hallmarks of psychological stress is a reduction in the immune system's capacity to fight disease. People who are under stress, mental and psychological, are people who are more open to being struck by diseases. And when we look then at our black lives and at our African lives in this nation and around the world, we see a people who are under a tremendous amount of stress, and therefore people who become vulnerable to suffering and death. Deaths due to cancer were also greater among blacks and may have contributed to the gap. Infant mortality among blacks is more than double that among whites and accounts for a large part of the difference in life expectancy. Those differences between the death of black children and the death of black babies have not decreased over the past years. When we talk about black people in comparison to whites, the infancy mortality rate is quite high and has not shown a decline. But that gap has not changed in the past few years and could not explain the gap that widened in 1985 and 86. And there are other things mentioned here, but the experts said it is difficult to link the social the social policy and life expectancy, but history has recorded some clear cases. For example, there was a large drop in the number of suicides among old people when the Social Security system was established. So again, you see a connection between political social systems and life itself, and between economic systems and life itself. It, of course, goes on further to talk about the disparity in black and white mortality, and the expert who said that the rise in homicides was likely a major factor. He said that 1 in 20 black men may expect to die from homicide, But the homicide increase alone cannot account for all of the difference. Of course not. It's a part of it. I saw an interesting piece here as I was reading Bullock's history of black education in the South to show how things sort of come around again and again. And I'll just have to start this quotation in the middle in interest time. Sparrow and Harris estimated that there were over 100,000 black artisans in the South at the close of the Civil War. By 1890, however, the skilled Negro had been virtually eliminated as a worker. And we often forget, we think that we are just entering into an age where we're gaining skills, and we have to recognize that we lost skills. And that we had so many people who were skilled at the end of the so-called slavery period. And that there were deliberate efforts by our enemies to reduce our skills and capacity as people. Over the passage of time, the forces of economic and social discrimination, and get the word economic and social discrimination, exposed Negroes to forms of personal and communal instability that were beyond the capacity of Negro education to correct. Again, indicating that education is not enough. It is a part of it, but not enough. Knowledge is not enough. A very important part of our development, but not sufficient in and of itself. The growing instability of their family life robbed the Negro child of his father model and exposed him to a growing matriarchy, which even now threatens his manhood. Crime rates soared among them, and the self-hate that segregation generated helped give them the highest incident of homicide of any element of the American population. Making the Negro image even more unsightly was the insecurity of body and person that the segregated tradition encouraged and that the special education program was unable to correct. He's talking about special education. He's in the context that he's using this term special education, he's talking about it in the sense of the founding of black agricultural colleges, vocational colleges, and institutes and technical colleges, the education of black scientific farmers who ran into the problem that after they learned their agriculture very well and learned to farm scientifically, they had the problem, of course, of getting the farm on, or they had the problem of the fact that the white plantation owners and so forth had no place for highly educated black farmers. If they needed anyone, they needed sharecroppers and ignorant ones who knew how to count very well, so they wouldn't be able to tell when and how they were being cheated. And so often then special education in the sense of especially preparing black males and females how to farm scientifically and do other things scientifically did not necessarily solve the problem. Out of the persistent blockages to the economic mobility of Negroes came increased poverty and pauperism. The problem of dependency was particularly serious among those in the urban South. He goes on to say, as a result of these economic and social practices, diseases among the Negroes placing a severe pressure upon their small crops of physicians and the limited health facilities available to the race. That is, the diseases spread among Negroes, placing a severe pressure on their small crops of physicians and the limited health facilities available to the race. During the period of slavery, when Negroes represented so much capital investment, again, now look at this thing here, where from white terms, human beings are seen as capital investment. and are seen in economic terms. Now, we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, and yet today, September 19th, 1988, we're still talking about what? Human capital. Human beings seen as capital investments. Now, note this sentence again then. During the period of slavery, when Negroes represented so much capital investment, not even me, their mortality rate was virtually the same as that of whites. Does the decrease then in life expectancy among our people mean that whites are beginning not to see us as valuable what? Capital investments? Does it also mean that we as a people also do not see ourselves as valuable capital investments as well? And therefore, our enemy who had to keep us alive because it kept him alive may no longer need us that much to keep himself alive, and we who have not awakened into the necessity of creating an economic system are also not keeping our own selves alive. This is what this decreased capacity is about. Again, showing a connectedness between economics and life itself, not just eating better or living in a bigger house and so forth. We're talking about the pure survival of the people. So what are we saying here? At one time we had a life but equal to that of whites. And yet things have changed. In fact, the Negro rate, here they, in terms of lifespan and so forth, was significantly lower than that of the white in some instances. That is, this was certainly true for those who lived. We're talking about the mortality rate here. So the word lower is referred to the mortality rate. In fact, the Negro rate was significantly lower than the white in some instances. So in many instances then, we were actually outliving these people. By 1910, however, the health picture had completely changed, and Negroes had begun to die at a rate almost double that of the whites. The most heavy loss was from the death of Negro babies who died at the rate of 261 per 1,000 live birth as compared to 129.7 for whites. And it goes on to talk about tuberculosis and other things then that occurred at this point in our history, and we see it visiting us again. So again then, we cannot emphasize enough that when we talk about economics, we are talking about life. Not just our ability to buy more gold chains and better cars and so forth and so on, but our ability to survive as a whole. In the interest of time, then, I'll just quickly go through a number of things. When we talk about the 21st century, we have to look at the trends of that century. And what are some of the trends? Well, one of the trends is one that was extolled in one of our major magazines, Newsweek, during the period February 22nd, 1988. And you see it, of course, titled what? The Pacific Century. Is America in decline? Reminds me of the statistic that was once developed by someone that showed a correlation between the hanging of black people and the price of cotton.
That's right.
As the price of cotton went down, the number of blacks hung went up. I've told people again and again that integrationism and all these dreams of Dr. Martin Luther King depends upon a healthy economy. Not morality, not teaching white folk to be good folk and all that other kind of stuff, but on whether there is enough of the economic pie to be shared. That the continued existence of our people does not depend upon civil rights laws being put upon books, does not depend upon whether we're going to have the right people in the Supreme Court or not, does not depend upon who is the president and so forth, doesn't depend upon that at all. It depends to a good extent upon the availability of resources. It does not matter what kind of laws you have on the books and so forth. If there's ever a point of time when the white man has to choose between feeding his child and your own, he's going to feed his own first.
That's right.
Since he is the one that passes the laws and enforces the law. If it becomes a life and death situation, he is not going to enforce a law that is going to work against the interests of his children and the life of his people. And for us to sit around and think that civil rights laws and human rights organizations are going to save us is ridiculous, and we should be ashamed of ourselves at this day and time to be thinking in those terms. Nothing but pure power and the pure ability to resist the incursion of our enemies is going to save us ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, not laws passed by these other people. Now we see we are coming into a new age here. And I've often asked this question. Assuming that we will gain liberation from the European, are we going to only gain that liberation at the price of falling under the authority of the Asian? Do not assume simply because the Asian is somewhat non-white that we're going to be so-called better off. There are a lot of people who identify with other non-whites, and think, well, they're getting the best of the white man, rah, rah, rah. It does not necessarily mean it's going to be a better for you. Who told you that the Japanese would treat you any better than the white man has treated you? Or the Korean, or any of the other groups? Particularly when there's a struggle for scarce resources, ladies and gentlemen. And I think you know in your hearts that you're not going to get any better treatment from one group or another if there is not enough to go around. Is America in decline? This is the kind of future that we are facing. The idea here, of course, is if America goes into decline, we are going to catch hell in this society. We may as well face it. And one of the things, and we can see then, these groups are not only operating in the world, on the global scale, but are operating in our very communities and have made incursions into the very infrastructure of our community and now set and ready to exploit whatever economic resources we have available to us in the community period. Let's do some quick quotations then from this particular piece. Not long ago, the idea that the world could look like this in the next century seemed unthinkable. And look, these are the other people talking here. Americans, protected for 2 centuries by vast oceans, enriched by natural resources, and a risk-taking spirit, have never taken easily to changes beyond their control. That's rough business, you see. People are have never had to deal with the fact now that things are beyond their control, and this creates a lot of problems. You know what happens to individuals when they begin to feel that the world has gotten out from under their control? You can imagine then what will happen to people who are beginning to feel that the world is getting outside of its control. And often what happens when people feel that the world is getting outside of their control, they look around for scapegoats. They look around for someone to attack. And they don't have to look far, because what the victims they usually choose are the people who are politically, economically, and otherwise the weakest. And we know who those people are.
That's right.
Vietnam drove home the bitter lesson that the United States was no longer a hegemonic power, and the oil shock of the 1970s showed its resources were not sufficient enough to insulate it from economic calamity. So here again, a reality is being faced. Now Japan is arguably the world's most powerful economic actor, ready to assume leadership in an era of rising Asian power, a period that experts have already dubbed the Pacific Century. In fact, the Asians call it the Asian Century, and they talk about it consciously. They had a meeting not too many months ago where the phrase, the Asian Century, was a conscious phrase and used in a very conscious way. If things continue as they are now, what did the people who study this trend said, it won't be much beyond 2010. So we're talking about within our lifespans here, before Japan becomes the leading power in world politics. Reinforcing the Asian Pacific's rising economic influence are the so-called Four Tigers, the newly industrialized countries of South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And staring ever more energetically after decades of economic idleness is China, a once and perhaps future superpower. With Asia coming on so strong, says William Overholt, a Bankers Trust economist in Hong Kong. The United States in the next 100 years could become a giant Australia. So here again we see a people reassessing their position in the world. And we're going to see then that position of the United States is going to reflect back on us as African Americans in a negative sort of a way. It means that we as African people have to get over this idea that has been inculcated in us through too much literature and through going to the movies such as the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know, fistful of dollars, where the white man always wins. And many of us believe as long as we are attached to the American white man because we see him winning no matter what. Even when he lost the war in Vietnam, we see him making movies where he still wins in some way or another. And we figured then that as long as we are hooked up to him, he's going to always win, because for many of us, we just can't believe the possibilities that the white man can lose, that there's another group of people who can overrun this man. And so we think then that since his winning is inevitable, even if we suffer, we're going to get some of the crumb from the table of his winning. But here again is a man beginning to realize that he is losing the game. And if he is losing the game, then how much more so if we don't get control of ourselves as people, will we also lose the game as people? I was looking at a show, some of you might have seen the show the other evening about superconductors. I think it was Friday, I think yesterday or Thursday, they did a piece on TV, and how the United States is in a very precarious position in terms of superconductors, and how, of course, the superconductor industry is going to transform the use of energy, and how those nations who have an edge in terms of superconductors are going to have a great edge economically.
That's right.
And how Japan has already organized its assembly lines and industrial base and organized its governmental and business systems to take advantage of superconductors, and how the United States is still stumbling around and fumbling around. It is so unfortunate that we as black people think white folks do everything right. And I run into that all the time as a business person. I'm going to take it to the white man. You know? And that's because so many of us don't read the Wall Street Journal, we don't read the New York Times business section.
That's right.
And where every day you see mistakes and stupid errors and everything made all the time by these people. But the average black people person just thinks, oh, they do everything right, they get it. You know, the situation is, ladies and gentlemen, they are able to make us pay for their mistakes. That's the advantage. I, as a black businessman or as a small business person, you make a mistake, you got to eat it, man. You're out. Con Ed, some of your electrical company over here, AT&T, they make a mistake, what do?
Up the rate.
Up your rate, that's all. And you think they're some great business person. All they do is just make you pay for it. You see, one way or the other. And yet, you can see the mismanagement of the American economy. The mismanagement of the American economy has been atrocious. The mismanagement of American business has been atrocious. But we, of course, as people, because we don't read deeply into economics and don't get deeply into the sources of economic news and so forth, are left with this illusion that whites know all about business, they know how to run it, and if you want it run right, go to the white man. And yet, when we look at the reality, we see that this is not the case. And we are going to suffer as a result thereof. You see, in semiconductors, the very vital part of computers and so forth, the United States is suffering terribly and is going to be overrun. The United States government has to subsidize the semiconductor industry, because if not, the Japanese, they will have to buy the semiconductors for the computers from the Japanese, which means the Japanese would know, in a sense, the structure of their most vital military computer operations. And in other words, if we buy all of our semiconductors from the Japanese, then in a sense our whole war machine is conducted through computers, and electronic warfare will be exposed to their knowledge and exposed to their sabotage. Again, we're talking about economics and the pure survival of the people. And on this piece will go. Of course, we don't have time to look at it all, but it's an interesting kind of piece. And if you get this magazine, get copies of them. I think it would be enlightening. Let's read one quick other thing here. Virtually all Americans will feel the dual impact of Asian immigration and investment. And this is the statement I find very interesting. Asian immigrants, who will number as many as 12 million by 2000, could affect America more profoundly than any group since the first boat people crossed over on the Mayflower. You get the impact of that? 12 million Asians in America will more profoundly affect America than the first boat people, of course referring to Europeans, who crossed over on the Mayflower. What about the 40 or 50 million African people in America? Are we saying then that 12 million Asians will have a greater impact on what goes on in America than the 40 or 50 million Africans? In fact, we're not even mentioned in this context at all. Then when we talk about spreading culture and so forth, we are not going to spread this African culture and have it impact upon this world until we have an economic impact upon this world. Culture is not just spread by ideas, it's spread along with trade. It's spread along with economic interactions between people. And you will find then culture and cultural imperialism being a part of economic imperialism. They're tied together. It's not simply because someone has some bright and great idea. Those ideas are reflective often of an economic order, support an economic order, and are disseminated through economic activities and so forth. Let's look again quickly at this future world, this world of the 21st century, human capital, I showed you, of course. And on the cover it states here, the nation's ability to compete is threatened by inadequate investment in our most important resource, people. And of course, ultimately is threatened by a lack of investment in what I think will be, could be the ultimate salvation of this country, and that is, of course, African people in America.
That's right.
The failure to invest in African Americans and in African period. Put simply, too many workers lack the skills to perform more demanding jobs. And as the economy comes to depend more and more on women and minorities, the New York City workforce is already majority black and Hispanic, non-white at this point. Here's a system that is going to depend upon minorities to continue itself. We face a massive job of education and training. Isn't this something we're realizing it too late to say you neglect? These people thought that they could neglect the education and training of black people and continue to survive as a people. It can't be done. Now they're facing a problem. Can we educate these people rapidly enough and retrain them rapidly enough? Can we get over our racism and hatred enough that we can train these people to continue our lives and to save our nation and to save our way of life? And they are facing a major, major dilemma. Starting before, they're talking about training, starting before kindergarten. Can we afford it? We have no choice. That's so right. We see America in a great crisis. But before you and before we as African people get too happy about their need for us, okay, there are things to be looked at. I don't have time to go through many of the quotes in here, and I'm going to skip them in the light of time. But there's one I'd like to make, because the part of the article says, well, we're going to need these black people, but then the black people are so poorly educated, they have such a problem of literacy, and all of these other things we've laid on them, we're going to have a difficult time getting them ready to carry on the economy, even though we need them in a way. Let's see if there's some other ways of handling this. So here's one of the conclusions they reach. It's titled, the U.S. could lower the drawbridge again. Faced with labor shortages in earlier times, America opened its borders.
That's right.
So don't think because you're here and because this country now that the white man and the white male is becoming a decreasing member of the workforce, and white people are going to need more and more non-whites to work this country, that means we are automatically going to be sucked up into the system. There are other ways and other approaches. And what the Prince mentioned here, immigration is still a policy option. the wild card in the labor market outlook. For Cornell University economist Vernon M. Briggs, unleashing even more immigration will stall the efforts to integrate women, blacks, and other minorities into the economy. And again here, we're looking at a situation. The immigration of other people into this nation is no accident. And while we may again, in our willingness as black people to be filled with brotherly love, and talk about our Asian brothers and our Asian sisters, we must also recognize the impact in a very honest and straightforward way, and our Hispanic brothers and sisters as well, isn't it? We have to talk reality, and even though it hurts, we have to look at it. That's why I'm going to tell you in a minute, you cannot sit around and ignore government policies and ignore debates on immigration policies and so forth. And as much as we want to love everybody and be loved by everybody, we also want to be alive. We also want to survive. We also don't want our resources just ripped and taken away from ourselves and our children and the future of our people being destroyed merely in the name of something called brotherly love. And our fear to face forth brightly the challenges that lie ahead of us, even if it does make other people and other groups uncomfortable. Better that they feel uncomfortable and feel a bit of anxiety than we not have any feeling at all laying cold in the graves. And we have to look at it and deal with it. Now here's one thing that was mentioned here. Today's immigrants, on average, they say, are less skilled than a native born. Most like a high school education, only 20% were admitted because of this. Only 20% are admitted because their skills are in great demand. But the criteria could change toward more preference for skills. This year, U.S. hospitals, to allay shortages, will hire 20,000 foreign nurses on 5-year visas. In other words, we're not going to upgrade the black nursing schools. We're not going to change the educational approaches and the pedagogical approaches so that we can educate 20,000, 30,000 or more black nurses and so forth. What we will do is what? Just import them in and take care of business. So the idea then that this country is going to become more increasingly dependent on minority people and women does not necessarily mean the salvation of black people. Let me just read you something quickly in tandem to this that came out on September 14, 1988. New York Times. The U.S. plans big rise in quota for Asian refugees. The Reagan administration today proposed an increase in the number of refugees who could be admitted to the United States in the coming year and announced plans for a dramatic increase in the number from Indochina, especially Vietnam. He goes on to say that Reagan approved the admission of up to 53,000 Asian refugees in the fiscal year that begins October 1st. Mr. Reagan had set a limit of 38,000 Asian refugees in the current fiscal year, and the State Department estimates that 35,000 will actually arrive. And it goes on to talk about the others that are coming in. And it states that the main reason for the proposed increase in refugee admissions is simply that there has been an increase in refugees around the world, as if Africa is not filled with refugees around the world. We get an influx in Asian refugees, and the rationale is, well, we're admitting more Asians because there are what? More refugees in the world. A very interesting logic there. Administration, the official said the number of refugees worldwide now exceeds 12 million, according to the United Nations. And it goes on to talk about 25,000 refugees from Vietnam and on and on and on, and who's going to be admitted in terms of this rationale. And it gets down to the last paragraph here. They talked about the administration proposed to admit up to 24,500 refugees from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I thought the Soviet Union was our enemy. That's an interesting thing there too, in the coming year. Mr. Reagan, this is the last paragraph, approved the admission of up to 2,000 refugees from where? From Africa in the coming year. 2,000. 2,000. And the clincher is, this is a decrease of 1,000 from the limit. The talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, then, in this situation? A nation whose demographics are changing drastically. The white man will be a minority in the United States around the middle of the next century. Hispanic groups and other groups together, combined with the African element, will outnumber whites. And that's going to bring about drastic political and social changes. We had better look at the implications of these demographic changes. The people we may have to compete against will not only then be whites, but will be other people. The others have already got into our communities and are already sapping the economic system. Are those others going to be any more open to our integrating into their economic systems and approaches as have been the whites? Particularly if the economic pie for everyone is shrinking.
That's right.
These things have to be faced and dealt with as unpleasant as they are. So in other words, then, when we talk about the 21st century, we are talking about a century then that confronts us with tremendous choices, economically speaking, and speaking on a number of other levels. I'm going to dispense with the quotation of further statistics and statements about our relative economic position, too many of which you already are familiar, and sort of emphasize some of what I think may be the more practical approaches to our economic situation as a people. And I'm just going to go through the list in the interest of time here that I have brought up. We're going to have to look at government policy and economics. And we're going to have to become involved with government policy and economics. The black nationalist must get off their high horses and face economic reality. They must get off of their economic elitism and face economic reality. They must continue to look at history and the things that we've looked at, but at the same time must begin to look at the current world and the future world. We've had organizations that have been educating people too long about history, and while talking about that history, the very community in which they're doing the educating is being taken over and inundated by other people economically. It is not enough for us merely. It is important. Don't get me wrong. I know people misinterpret me when I say these things. It is important and it is necessary. But what I'm saying, it is not sufficient. There is more needed than just knowing your African self. You got to get out there and do some work. You got to get your hands dirty. You can't just get an elitist, purist attitude that I see too many of us having. Politics are dirty, politicians are dirty, and this is the capitalist system. I have nothing to do with it. I have nothing to do with white folk. I have nothing to do with mixing again and dealing with what's going on in the world. And that kind of attitude then has led to a situation where our community is being taken over. We must not only study the history of African people, we must study the history of the United States, and we must study the economics of the United States. And we must become aware of economics. We must become more aware of the international politics. I hear some Negroes say, well, I don't give a hoot about America, I'm going to Africa. What are you talking about, man? The white man's influence is global. You're not going to escape the white man by going to Africa. He's going to be everywhere you go. You must recognize that you're dealing with a global economic system. And you're going to have to confront it everywhere you go. And you're not going to escape the economic pains and pressures of the white man by running to Africa, because you're going to run right into it over there. And therefore trying to ignore it and trying to ignore the knowledge of it can only be done at the peril of our people. We as black people must recognize that there is an intimate relationship between governmental policy and economics. In fact, governmental policy and economics are one and the same thing. The greatest part of work done by the Congress of the United States and by the President and so forth, the greater part of bills that are processed through the Congress and in the government are concerned with economic policies, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're not hooked into what is going on in government, you're not hooked into economics. You cannot ignore the economic practices and policies of the United States government and deal comfortably with your own economic situation. You must read the New York Times. I don't give a damn if it is written by white folk.
That's right.
You must read the Wall Street Journal and read the other journals as such, because the economic reality is there. Gorbachev realized that he had to read it. The Chinese recognize that they have to read it, and we have to recognize that we have to read the Times and the other ones as well. I talked to some African brothers. I was talking to one brother there. He's going to go to Africa, and he's going to build and this and that, and then he's going to have the people learn to do ceramics, and he's going to then get them to ship the ceramics back to the United States. Yes, he's anti-United States. Now, okay, and I would say, okay, brother, maybe we can work out some kind of deal for distribution in the United States. No, I'm going to talk to Woolco. You know, Woolworth, you know. And in the same breath, I'm trying to talk to him about the need for us as black nationalists to come together in a major conference and make our positions very clear about economics and money. Black people have not settled the issue with money and where money fits within the African movement and within the African community. That issue needs to be worked on and resolved. We need to be very clear about our relationship to the United States and its economic policies. You cannot deny that need on one hand and then talk about selling to Woolco and getting Woolco to distribute your products on the other hand. And yet this is what the brother was trying to do at one and the same time. You have to recognize that at this point, the United States still forms, even in its decline, one of the largest markets in the world. And there are essentially about 3 major markets in the world: the United States, Western Europe, which is becoming even larger, and of course the potential Asian market. If you are not in those markets, you are poor. Face it. That's the way it goes, ladies and gentlemen. The African nations need the United States market if they're to move forward, unless we deliberately choose poverty and its consequences. And we can do that too, that's no problem as well. But it must be done with sense, not out of some emotional reaction. You see, the United States is a major market in the world, and those nations and people who are cut out of this market are also poverty-stricken. Gorbachev recognized that. Why do you think he's over here licking butt?
That's right. That's right.
He recognized that he's not going to move the Russian economy forward and not going to bring those people out of economic trouble unless he reaches some kind of relationship with the United States. The Chinese recognize that as well, and the others recognize that as well. And we as African people may as well come up and face the reality that we've got to look hard at the economic structure of the United States and see how that structure can be utilized for our advantage. But let's look at the city of Newark. You have too many black politicians here running on poverty planks. They're going to get you welfare. They're going to get you increased Medicare. And they're going to get you increased housing. All of these beggary programs. How many of them talk about really conduiting the millions and billions of dollars that are in the Newark government into your hand so you don't have to talk about welfare and talk about these other things? Government is about the distribution of wealth and the allocation of wealth and resources. When you're in the government, then you are in a position to change the direction of wealth. Look at the New York City school system for a moment. It spends over $6 billion. That can make a lot of millionaires. That feeds a lot of people. It feeds thousands of teachers and thousands of and hundreds of custodians and hundreds of support personnel. It feeds construction companies. It feeds food companies. It feeds chalk companies, pencil companies. All of these people are fed out of the control of that $6 billion budget. That's why the Jews and other people are going to hang on to that board even though their children are not in these schools. And we must understand then that you not only want to get control of the Board of Education merely because it is about the education of your children, but because it represents a tremendous sum of money, which if conduited into the black community, we wouldn't have to have poverty pimps running for office the way we do today.
That's right.
And that's what government is about. Even more important than the mayor's role is the controller's role.
That's right.
who is concerned with the investment of city wealth. Harrison Golden in New York City sits on some $30 billion of wealth. He can make a bank rich overnight by merely depositing that money or parts of those monies right into a bank like Freedom National or some other bank. The funds you pay for your retirement are not just stacked up in some vault somewhere. Those funds are used and invested by banks. They're invested by your union so that they may grow in interest so that you will be paid in your retirement. They're invested in housing. They're invested in factories. They're invested in all types of vehicles. So then if you got a controller who's investing retirement funds and other things, if those investments were made in the black community, you would see a vastly different community than what you see today. So you want to run those people for office, not because it makes you proud that they are some role model, and because you're going to get your nuts off as a result of some guy making one of those salaries.
That's right.
And this is what we do as people. You're getting them in office so they will redistribute that wealth. Why do you think people spend $2 or $3 million or $4 or $5 million to get a man to get in a job that's maybe pay him $40,000 or $50,000, ladies and gentlemen? The business of America is what? Business. That's what it's all about. We must understand the relationship between policy and economics. The government has tremendous impact upon the economics of a nation. Taxing along, tax incentives, when to tax, how to give tax relief and so forth. Regulations in terms of price settings, regulations in terms of rules of how an industry is run, regulations in terms of affirmative actions, regulations in terms of minimum wages, regulations in terms of subsidies of things like farm crops and other kinds of things. Distribution of money for research and development, selling of government land and institutions and so forth, which they literally give away government control over natural resources and things of this nature. All of these policies are economic policies. And if you're not into those policies and understand those policies, then you're not into economic development and growth. When the nationalist community discourages people from becoming interested in a deep sort of way in American government political activity, and when we discourage people from becoming engaged in political activity in America, we are being counterproductive, not productive, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot protect our people by developing a deliberate ignorance of what is going on in the world around us. We must become aware of what is happening. We must recognize that in moving out of our economic situation, as I said earlier, that economics is a set of social relations more than anything else. Not just money. We have money as black people. It's not the absence of money. If we didn't have money, other people wouldn't be jumping into your community trying to take it out. You can't get something from nothing. There must be money in the black community because you see people who are jumping over each other to get it. Millions and billions of dollars flow through our communities. Teachers that don't live in your community, what? The money's coming in and they're just taking you out. Policemen who don't live in the community. Garbage men, sanitation men. Think of all the city workers and other people who don't live in the community, and yet those are millions of dollars for service to the community that does not stay there and goes in another direction. Ultimately, then, what we need more than money is a set of relationships one to the other that sees that money is used for our interest. As I said earlier, there were economic systems before there was money, because it is the nature that people choose, the nature of relations people choose. And we must understand that we have to work on changing the nature of our relationship one to the other first. When we talk about the maladjustment of the personality, the lack of trust so many of us have in each other, the lack of faith that so many of us have, the lack of importance that we place between ourselves as people, you must recognize that those things have been instituted in us by a system that wants to take us out of economic competition. As I've said in the other context, when you look at almost any character flaw or maladjusted trait in the black personality, you can trace that trait back to an economic political function. We are not shaped as we are merely because someone hates us. merely because they have something against our color. We are shaped, and the kind of personality traits are created in us so that we will not be competitive against other people, and we essentially can play the role that we've been designed to play in this culture, and that is one of consumption. And consumption based on compensating for inferiority complexes. And having an inferiority complex is the major motive behind black consumption. And you can believe then that any people who make money out of our feeling inferior are not about to remove that feeling from our personality.
That's right.
And it's that same feeling, while it supports the economics of other people, stands in the way of our own economic development. And consequently then, we have to engage in some form of sociotherapy so that the relationships between ourselves may change. We have a history in America, in the African society, of raising, dealing with money. I was hearing the other day about the Nicaraguans in Miami who are becoming economically organized. And of course you're familiar with the Cuban organization in Miami. And you're familiar with blacks who've been down there hundreds of years and they've yet to be organized and yet complain. What is the problem? A lack of systematic relationships one to the other as people. The Africans had what we call the Susu or Isusu, which we see operating even within the Caribbean community that somehow was lost in the black community. It's a type of revolving credit system that must be revived in the black community as a base for creating our own system. These banks are not our banks. I don't care even if you're talking about Freedom National. They're not our banks. Those are institutions created by other people for other people. And even when your own people are in them, they must obey the rules and regulations and standards set by the other people. There's no such thing as standard business practices, which Negroes like to talk about a whole lot. No such thing. They're white folks' business practices, and they are standard because they work to their advantage. Do not be deceived by these things. We need, as a people, our own system of financing, our own banking system. As such, this is the only way you're going to move up. When you study the history of other people, you will see that this is what happens. When you go to a white bank, they give you this whole handful of forms, and right away you can see you're in trouble. Give me your last 3 years of your income tax statements, you know, and your corporation papers, and this one and that one and so forth. Yet you read, if you read the New York Times closely, how two brothers, two white guys who were brothers, got in debt to the tune of something like $250 million. How? Because they could get loans on their signatures. They didn't fill out forms and all that other stuff. They walk into a bank and the bank, oh, how you doing, Mr. So-and-so? The banks were flattered to give them money. They had rooked those banks out of $250 million before they caught on. But when you go in there, what is it, form after form and this after that, and you call that what? Standard business practice. Not the people who are inside.
That's right.
Not for the people who created the system. You'd be surprised at the informality that takes place in the use and movement of money.
That's right. That's right.
You see? But then that means we have to develop our own informal systems. We must develop these credit unions so they may be used. We must develop, of course, community ownership. One of the problems with these nationalists, not only are they African nationalists, they're also caught up in Marxism. They got both of them kind of confused and upset and are paralyzed between the two. And then you got a bunch of people who think they're less capitalist when they don't own anything but work for big capitalist organizations. So they figure you're some capitalist because you go and own something or build a business, and yet they'll go downtown and work for some of the largest capitalist monopolies and think that they are somehow less capitalist than you are, and will refuse then to engage in business development. Or they get caught up in this thing of having things owned by the people. Fine, if you want things owned by the people, organize a bunch of people and own a business. That's okay, I don't have any problem with that. But we don't even see them organizing on that level. The community control of commercial property. You must control your community. Do not fall victim to this idea of reverse racism. Well, if you say the Asians can't come, how can you justify us letting you in? You can't fall for that, ladies and gentlemen. Any race of people, any nation of people who think of themselves as a race protects their turf. And Japan is doing the same thing. And it's telling the Japanese, unless you open your markets, we're going to close ours to you. If you're going to sell Japanese TVs here and you're going to run our own TV makers out of business, you're going to have to set up a factory within the United States and give our people work. You just don't let people run in and sap out your resources. No nation does that. Because we don't think of ourselves as a nation, and we just lay ourselves open so that anybody can come in and prostitute our resources. We have a right to see that that we pass on to our children an economic heritage, and that we do not mortgage that heritage to another people. You don't do it. And that's the difference between wealth and income. A lot of us confuse. You see a lot of comparison. What's the black income compared to the white income? The real thing you have to compare is wealth, and wealth and income are not one and the same thing. And it's wealth that you pass on to your children, not income.
That's right.
You see, you can make $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 a year. When you die, it's over. Their children don't get that salary. The next person who gets a job gets a salary, not your children. But when you own land and have real estate and have real property, that goes on after your death, and it moves right on into the next generation. And it is wealth that we must concern ourselves with. And therefore, we must own the turf on which we live. And we must then see that we have control of it commercially. We must look hard at investing in the American economy. And I know some people find a conflict there, but you got to look at it. The white man is going to be a minority in this country, as I said earlier. We got to look at the fact too that the economic horizons are changing in this country. As I've often said to people who think that they must escape to Africa, why not think of taking control of America? Why not think of it that way? Instead of escape, why not think of, say, how can we take control of this nation economically? How can we take control of it politically? And right away, of course, you might say, well, minority can't take control of a majority. Well, I see white South Africans down there doing a hell of a job of it. A minority of people. And how is it that even with the trouble they have, they still manage to sap this country of its resources and this nation of its resources, being a minority of people? And of course, when we look at Europeans in general, we see what? A minority of people exploiting the majority. And so the idea that you are a minority in this country does not necessarily imply that you cannot manipulate it and influence it and impact upon its economic and social policy. The Jewish population is less than 3%. And yet we don't even have to talk about the economic, social, and political impact that population has on this country. We are 4 times, almost 5 times larger than the Jewish population in this country. And yet, when you look at the political impact and how they control foreign policy in this nation's economic policy, you begin to wonder what has happened. So we would have to then look at this American economy, not only in terms of how it works against us and discriminates against us, but how can we move into it? How should we invest into it? How should we get so wrapped up inside of it until they cannot separate it without destroying themselves in the process as such? One of the reasons why in South Africa, the white South Africa can have the kind of impact they have in South Africa is their connection with African people. What if we then increased our connection and our bond with the continental Africa? What if we made and increased our connection with the Caribbean African, with the South American African? Then it is quite possible if those bonds were strengthened and economic relations were strengthened, we as a so-called minority in the United States could have a major impact in the economic development and direction of this country. But we must have vision and we must have imagination. And we must not only think in terms of escape, but think in terms of conquering and taking and moving forward. And so we must, I'm calling for a conference of some kind among nationalists and other Africans to look at investment policy in terms of the United States and the American economy. We must recognize and we must get our African brothers to understand, the African brothers from the continent, that their support of Africans in America is vital to their their own economic and political advancement. And we got a bunch of African diplomats and others who come over here and spend millions, if not billions, in the New York City economy without spending it with their African brothers. That has got to end, and it's a stupid policy. I have a business and office supply. I cannot go and even pick up a pencil that says made in Africa. I can pick up one that says made in Taiwan. I can pick up one that says made in China. I can pick gym clips up made in Taiwan. I can pick all kinds of plastic objects made in this country and that country, but I have yet to find one that says, well, made in Africa, made in Nigeria. If you recall, the Japanese economy developed from the making of these kind of small items. Little plastic objects and this and that. It's important, though, that a nation can start at this level, because what it does is organize the workforce, and it rationalizes the economic system. And so making the pencils and the gym clips and all of these items, which on the surface may not appear to be important, but when you look at how they organize and discipline the workforce and organize an economic system, they are of tremendous importance. Because you move from there to assembling TV sets and to assembling other things to manufacture, and you set then the country on the road to technological advancement and independence. But in order for a country to achieve these kind of goals, it must have a market where which it can sell its products. And products are not sold merely because you make them. Those products must be distributed, and markets must be made available for those products. Now, we as African Americans, the largest minority in this country, should be politically strong enough and active enough so that we can open the American market to African-made products. And consequently, we open the American market to African-made products, we then enhance the technological growth of Africa as a continent and African nations as a whole. But if you're not in the Congresses, and if you're not electing your people, and if you're not building the committees so that when this nation makes decisions as to who is a so-called friendly nation that gives certain trade advantages and so forth, you'll find a situation where, though we are the largest minority in the nation, those people who have the smallest minorities, the market of the nation is thrown wide open to them. And therefore it is in the interest of Africans to support the economic and support the political empowerment of African Americans in this country, because it opens up this country for their own economic growth and development. And it opens up then a network between Africans and Africans on the continent that will have the most powerful impact this country has ever seen, and the most powerful impact that this world has ever seen. But you got to talk about it, you got to study it, you got to work at it to see what it's about. And I don't see it discussed enough. Must think in terms of nationhood. A system must, in order to have the system, that system must fall in terms of some kind of systematic relationship between people, as I said. And the economy is a systematic relationship between people. We at this point as black people are individuals with money. Okay, and that's quite different from an economy. It is only though when you get a sense of nationhood and peoplehood do people move beyond individuals with money to a nation with money, and you have a money system and a credit system and so forth available. Nationhood and a thought of nationhood and peoplehood is necessary to the development of an African system. I've got to rush through. We already have a distribution system set up in the United States. How many churches are nationally organized? The AME Church, the CME Church, the Baptist Church. They have churches all over the country, in every city, in every place in this country. They send literature, they have hierarchies, they have functionaries, they have a whole system of organization, and yet we think we can't run a nation, yet you have national organizations. These national organizations can become the basis for a national distribution network economically. These churches and building shopping malls and housing systems and impacting upon supermarkets and other kinds of things that are in black communities can then make markets available so that we can engage in African manufacturing in this country and outside of this country. We can use the resources already available in the churches. Nationalism. Too many people think of black people as being poor. If you're going to say that we are poor as black to become truly nationalists again, we are going to become what? Wealthy. How can you become nationalist and say you're going to take back what has been taken from you and not become what? Wealthier. The nationalists then should be in the business of making people what? Wealthier. When we talk about nationalism, we're not just talking about an attitude per se. We're also talking about an increase in material wealth and an increase in spiritual wealth as well. If we are truly going to take back what has been taken from us. And yet we have too many nationalists who somehow identify with poverty. The kind of nationalism we should be talking about is not an identification with poverty. And you wonder why people don't attend your nationalist conventions and so forth? Because you don't have anything to offer. When you have wealth and when you can offer people and add something to people's lives, you won't have to go out and beat the bushes for them. They're going to do what? They'll come to you. That's one of the reasons why I'm trying to develop the business and develop something, because I want to say that the nationalist philosophy is not just an intellectual critique. It's not just a way of looking at the world. It gives you something, what? Concretely. And it is when nationalists deliver the goods and the potatoes and stuff that the nationalists will win over the other groups. Not just when nationalists are elegant and erudite critics. And we must recognize that, and we will attract them. We must then engage in economic education. Economic education is unrealistic in this country, and we don't have time to talk about it. We must get into real estate and investment. To a good extent, we can fund our economic activities by backing in real estate. We must check immigration policy. We must look at the church not only as a place where people shout and get spiritual food, but the church must be seen as a business. If you have time, read the relationship between Protestantism and capitalism. Tony's book. What is it? T-A-W-N-E-Y. R.H. Tarney, who talks about the spirit, Protestantism and the spirit of capitalism. There's a relationship between people's religious concepts and ideas and their economic development as such. In the black community, these things have been too long cut off one from the other. We must then see the church, which has billions of dollars under its power, as a source for economic development. Organizations as business partners, we should look at that. Of course, initiation, someone mentioned here, the whole kind of thing. We've been taking control of our community, employing our youth in protecting the community, getting over the pure ignorance. There's just pure, outright, and rank ignorance in the black community about matters of economics. And too many ignorant people going into business. And too many vain people.
That's right.
You know, you can have an African ideology and still suffer from vanity and egoism and all the other things. We have a lot of people who are nationalists, but who still carry the flaws of egotism and vanity. I talked to brothers about investing, and the first thing, before they can tell me how much they're going to invest, they're asking me, can they be chairman of the board? You know? And I tell you, brother, I've learned one thing about why preachers deal with sisters. Because these brothers who thunder and carry on about black nationalism are the last one to invest in anything. They don't put the money up. They don't put the money where the mouth is. We got a lot of them out here who talk that nationalist stuff, who are so scared and cowardly, really, you wouldn't believe it. It's easy to thunder and talk and take no risk.
That's right.
And put your savings and put your other stuff on the line. And we have too many then who do a lot of eloquent talking, but you don't see them putting any of their wealth or any other resources, anything out on the line and demonstrate what they're talking about. And we have a lot of brothers who are doing that out here, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
But I tell you, when you get down to it, the sisters are the ones who come on in and give us the kind of support. And I'm saying, tell you that deliberately, brothers, because I know it from experience in my own struggles over there. Men who sit around and have long conferences and talk and all that kind of stuff, and in the end you don't get anything, just waste weeks of your time. And then make promises and don't keep them and all the other kind of nonsense that goes on. And they talk about how they're Garveyites and this kind of ites and all that. It's a mess.
That's right.
And how they get caught up in their nationalism until their vision is so restricted, until they can contribute little to business development. We must see the white man as the enemy. And by that, I've often stated then that one of our problems is that we as African people have no enemies. That's the problem. It's a problem. When you don't have people as enemies, you don't have anyone to overcome. You don't have anyone to outsmart. You don't set a program for yourself, you see. The Japanese see the United States in the sense as an enemy, in the sense that it's to be overcome, it's to be outtraded, it's to be outdone. Then we must set and be strong enough to say, we are in this world to overrun the white man economically. That has to be a part of your program. I don't give a damn how scared you feel when you say it. You got to go on and do it. And you got to set the program up for doing it. And you got to move forward. If you don't set it that way, you're going to die. I'm telling you up front.
That's right.
Because once you have that goal organizes your mind. It stimulates your imagination. It stimulates your vision. It gives you the persistence and the patience and the other kind of stuff you need. And you need a lot of it out here if you're trying to make it economically and develop things economically among our people. We must then watch these redlining things. Stop giving banks money to finance other people, to finance highways for your jobs to be moved out, to finance suburbs, and finance everybody but the black community. We've got to become more conscious of what banks are not contributing to the black community, but are soaking up city money, black money, and so forth, and using that money to finance other people. And a deliberate conscious program of boycotting and burning these banks down must be instituted. We have to let them know. And we have to, of course, ultimately, we're going to have to build our own situation. We must build our own business schools and develop our own business school. A course is not only determined by the nature, by its subject matter, it is determined by the issues and problems facing a people. When you take a course in economics in the white university, they have what they call case studies and so forth, where they take actual problems and business problems and situations from their own community and make the students work those problems out as a part of getting credit in those courses.
That's right. That's absolutely
That's the way these people are educated. But you don't find these problems say, well, given this is the shape of the black community, how will you raise money? How would you change this customer who's been accustomed to thinking that things made by white folk, even if you are selling them, are inferior to those things made by black folk? How do you set up a marketing plan to turn these kind of people around? How do you set up a retraining program for the black business person and such? How do you move? What is the nature and shape of the black economy? Does it pay to look at the native black African American economy as a third world economy? What does that imply for banking services? Does it mean then that banking services which have been developed for a mature economy are inadequate for an economy that should be looked upon as a developing economy? And therefore then maybe the cash and the things we need are cash that's normally available for what we call venture capitalists. We have a lot of venture capitalists out here, ladies and gentlemen, but you know what they tell you? Unless you borrow $1 million or $2 million, we can't do business with you. But a lot of people tell you right away, I don't need $2 million or $3 million. I need $40,000 or $50,000. Oh, but that's too little for us to lend you. So you get caught between two horns of the dilemma. You either get too much or you can't get enough. Put that into a business class for a black business student. How do you solve this problem? How do you take the churches and organize church money in such a way that it can be used for the advancement of the black community? Those are the things that a black economics course will offer. We must then also look at our Africans. There are many Africans on the continent who have money.
That's right.
How is that money, and many people across the world, African and particularly non-Africans, see the United States as the best place to invest their money because of what they see as political stability and other kinds of returns. And a lot of the money, in fact, the United States as a debtor nation has stayed alive these last 10 years as a result of Japanese money. The Japanese essentially have financed the United States economic system. When we talk about a nation selling bonds and so forth, what we're talking about is a nation that's borrowing money. And when people buy bonds, they are lending money to a nation. So when the Japanese buy United States bonds and so forth, what the Japanese are doing is financing the United States as an economy. And when they invest in building and in real estate and so forth, again, they're financing the United States economic development. What then is happening with African nations and African people and African individuals who have money and resources? How are those monies being invested in the United States? Are they being invested in the United States? Are there African Americans who are agents for their investment in the United States? And are they being invested in such a way that they can benefit the African community? Can we, as African people in America, look at the resources we have and decide how we're going to use those resources? We have a great deal of expertise in this country. Have we as African Americans looked at how we can export that expertise? Mm-hmm. Can we sell the expertise we have available? You know, you look at Colin, what's his name? The general?
Colin Powell.
Powell. Very interested in it. Here's a man who was Reagan's major, the chief, military advisor. Literally then the commander-in-chief in a sense, because he's the man that's going to tell the president pretty much what to do in security matters. Now, of course, he's now going on to be the head of all American ground combat forces.
That's right.
Very interesting. He's going to get a 4-star. He's getting ready to be promoted to the Joint Chief of Staff. The ultimate military ruling power in this country and in this world, ladies and gentlemen. Black men sit there. What kind of black man must that be in that kind of position? What kind of knowledge does he have available? How many other generals do we have? How many other sergeants? How many other special forces? And yet, how and why should our people in South Africa fight tanks with stones and rocks? How can we export that military expertise? How can we export the computer expertise that we developed here? How can we export the other kind of expertise that we have available in America today? How can we do scientific research and export our scientific talent to African countries and use scientific talent in America for the development of our continent as such? Those are important questions we should ask, because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, just as Israel is seen as the ultimate refuge for the Jews in America, we have to see Africa as the ultimate refuge for Africans in America. And consequently, we must prepare that continent for the possibility of our homecoming. Thank you very much for your time.
We're going to take only a couple of questions, and they have to be brief because we want to take about a 5-minute break to allow everybody to go into the hallway and maybe get some heat. Because instead of turning the heat on, it seems as if they turned the air up. So, if anyone has a question, please step to the microphone, and please keep your question brief. And we're going to ask Dr. Wilson to keep his answer brief in order so that we might get out of here and get some heat, come back and enjoy the summation of the entire conference. Microphone. Microphone 6.
Dr. Wilson, I applaud you and I appreciate the fantastic and enlightening lecture. I like to say, it just seems like the base that you touch, nationalism, economics, social theory, and those bases in substance. Trying to say the view that I see, the ingredient that I see that is truly matters in our people is that when I look at some of the very enlightening things I hear from you and Dr. Clarke and a lot of young black geniuses that's around and spreading that knowledge, I see things that I see from W.E.B. Du Bois when he borrowed certain strategy of the Europeans were into, which was sociology, which is somewhat like a middle stage or advanced stage. We, as people, never got the first phase. I think what we need basically is psychiatry. And then from psychiatry, you can deal with sociology. Because everything you said is based off inadequate psychiatry that people have.
Yeah,
and I mean, once we get that, I can get it together.
I agree with you, terms, because ultimately, whatever we have comes from the mind of man. And everything that we experience ultimately converges and comes from the psyche. And as I think you're implying then, it is the nature of the psyche that creates the nature of the world we live in. And once then we can recreate the nature of our psyche, we then begin to recreate the world. And I appreciate your comments as well. Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
That's okay.
I do appreciate what my brother was saying. I understood you to say you were addressing the power of the black church. You were addressing nationalism. My question to you is, according to your knowledge and understanding, what nation do we, the so-called Negroes of America, belong?
In what sense?
In the sense of land, language, culture, identity. For example, my brother, you speak of nation, right? What nationality are you?
The thing that I'm speaking to at this point here, I see myself as an African person, which is a very broad term.
Hallelujah.
Yes, but what I'm basically speaking of, I'm not so much dealing with identifying myself at this point. I'm dealing with the idea of the fact that this idea of nationhood needs to be further developed, and it's something that needs to be defined. I'm treating it as something that is in development and needs further development, not as something that has already necessarily been accomplished and dealt with and solved. I'm treating the concept of nationhood as a problem that needs to be solved and that needs to be defined. So consequently, I cannot tell you exactly what nation. I think this is a part of our dilemma. We have to, as a people, arrive at the concept of nation and develop that concept.
I agree with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brother Amos, I saw an article in one of the magazines in which the American Indians on the reservations sold part of the reservations so that they could appropriate certain things that they would need, and they went full scale into business. And they sell a pencil, made out of a certain tree on their land. Now, that's only one thing that they're doing, but they're coming into the business arena as small businessmen, want to collect the scale in terms of application. You raised on so many different levels, very broad perspective, very ingenious perspective of how intricate and how important the economic development of our people is. I feel that we need to then go on in developing that idea by creating groups to meet together, for us to meet together as people on a continual basis based on this idea, so that even if you don't have any money, come together and see how we can obtain money, or what we can do to create that resource so that we can develop business ideas and make this an application. I'd like you to that's a comment, I guess it's not really a question, but you could...
Certainly, And this is the position where I am now, and that is the position of engaging in concrete organization of people. And economy, of course, as I said, is not just about money. Even in my own economic efforts, I have used the influence, the friendship of others to help me out in a number of ways. Just this week, in an effort to regain my own business and regain control of that business, I called upon some people who did not give me money, but who gave me something very, very important. There was their influence, their ability to influence some other people who had a major impact upon my further economic development. So the idea here then is not only are we organizing in terms of people who can give money and not money, but people who have a lot to give in many other ways that are an important part of economic development. Of course, even bartering, which does not necessarily involve money, but it involves an exchange of services, which of course, which is what man engaged in from eons in the past, can be brought back into business. I think though, if you could really have a relatively small number of people who, if they are really dedicated and imaginative and ingenious, can have a major impact on the economic development of black people. I think it would be a mistake if we feel as if we've got to convert every black person or large masses of black people before we engage in economic development. I think we should look around us where there are 2 or 3 other people who are like-minded and begin with that small group. Because when we look at the history of ideas and the history of changes, often they have been brought about by small groups, not by whole thousands of people preached and who all of a sudden were converted, but people who, seeing the growth and development of this group, begin to move toward it and see something in it. So I'm urging our people to begin to organize in terms of what is available to them, and that may mean 2 or 3 people.
So ultimately what you're saying is that as a people, we begin to relate and interrelate on a social level.
Yes.
Then we can then from that base create wealth.
I think it's very, very important to the social level. In fact, I think when we form organizations for economic development, we should almost have a therapeutic session and begin to restructure the personnel, because as I said, often what destroys our economic organizations, and I've seen it in my own personal experience, is not the absence of money. Often I've dealt with people who had $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 under their belt, and who either because of envy, because of thinking in the negative, or other things, wouldn't let go of $1,000 of that money. You see, and so their problem was not an absence of money, and sometimes it wasn't really an absence sometimes of economic knowledge, but an absence of trust, an absence of faith, or a certain amount of absence of the ability to engage in an intimate and trusting relationship with other people. And I find often when you got people, even when they have money, your first approach may be that though of working on their psychology and working on their social relations, one with the other.
Thank you, brother.
And in many of the organizations you see, even with where the Asians and others have raised money, and with the Susu organizations, those organizations are not only money-raising organizations, they are social systems. In fact, they enforce the payments of the members of their obligations more through the social pressure than anything else. And it is the fear of being socially ostracized that keeps those people cohesive. So one of the first efforts you have to get into when you deal with our people is not so much to look at their money, but at their ability to really work together and cooperate one with the other. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Wilkins. I have a quick question, which is how to develop the necessary groups for investment, utilizing the resources, monetary, time, and effort.
It's pretty hard to put forth the standard formula for that, and one that can work across boards. The thing I found again in my own experience is that more than a catalog knowledge of how to is flexibility of mind, is of course a tremendous amount of persistence. I'm more talking about personality characteristics. You see, openness of mind, imagination, daring, ingenuity, you see, and the thing that you trust are your capacities in these areas, you see, and the ability to analyze a situation, and as a result of that analysis, arrive at the appropriate method of accomplishing a goal, you see. Because I think one of the problems we have is often we take these cookbook approaches, and sometimes what I referred to earlier as standard business approaches, and we then attempt to impose those approaches upon our situations. Trust your ingenuity. Trust your capacity to arrive at the right answer. Look then for people you think that can be compatible in terms of forming a working relationship with them, and then look for people who have the kind of characteristics that I've talked about, and then you can sit down, study an economic situation, study a market situation, analyze that situation, and then arrive at a workable program, rather than necessarily walking in with, you know, a set of approaches already laid out as such.
Contracts, huh?
Definitely contracts. Very, very important. And you bring up a point that I think is very important. Many of us, as African people, we want love so much, and we talk about African brotherhood so much, until we become very loose in our business relations one to the other. You know, and we think, and we see people, they belong to the first world like we do, and they belong to ASCAC and African Echoes and so forth. And we assume, you know, and they know the ideology. And we kind of make an assumption then that they're all right, and it's going to be okay. And I tell you, nothing destroys friendships like business. Nothing leads to hate like partnerships, and I can tell you from experience, okay? And a lot of it is based on the idea that, well, we're African brothers, we should love one another. We should trust one another, we should. But I tell you, you should have contracts. You should have, how you're going to relate to each other should be clearly spelled out, or else, I thought you meant, I thought you said, you know. And you'll get into that mess so rapid it'll make your head swim.
I'll be right back.
Huh? No, I want to talk to Brother Tom. Bring up
He made one up for the...
Let's see, he wanted to push his pet. This is
Everyone, please return to your seats. We're going to get started now. In case y'all haven't read the program that we handed out, number 4 of the conduct rules states that you can feel free to encourage the moderators or speakers. A simple amen, that's right, will suffice. I just wanted to remind y'all of that for when Brother Clarke comes before us, you'll give him his just due. That's right. Each time I introduce Dr. Clarke, it's a challenge because I try to do a little better than I did the previous time. And I don't know whether I should cut back any introductions or do more research to add new things because it's getting harder each time. He is an elder and a prophet. He is one of our most profound African intellects. He is a man for those who seek an example of manhood. He is a teacher who does not simply instruct, but he gives clear guidance and direction. For 20 years, he has been a professor of African world history at Hunter College in New York. He is an historian, editor, and writer. His books include Malcolm X, The Man in His Time, and Marcus Garvey and His Visions of Africa. He is the praiseworthy one to whom those who are praised give praise. As a testimony to our African legacy of producing African intellectual giants, he is self-taught. He has battled most of his life against our oppressors, and he remains standing. He has looked into books and found information that most historians and doctors of philosophy do not know exists. Because just as there is life in the deeper depths of the ocean of which the average fisherman knows nothing, so there are depths in the ocean of research which some of the most learned have never dreamed. You know, I'm afraid that maybe we African people will never truly come to understand this man. For as the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey stated, the time has come for the black man to forget and cast behind him his hero worship and adoration of other races, and to start out immediately to create and emulate heroes of his own. Brothers and sisters, let's put our hands and feet together for our elder brother and friend, Dr. John Henrik Clarke.
I will try to sum up what I have to say in less than an hour because I want you to have plenty of time to ask some questions. I will look back in order to look forward. I believe that all history is a current event and that nothing is truly ancient because everything that ever happened continues to happen. And the first man that sneezed is still influencing the atmosphere and will for all time to come. And the first kid that threw a pebble in the ocean is still influencing the ocean and will for all times to come. So everything that has ever happened continues to happen. And I'm glad Amos Wilson spoke before me because he eliminated a whole lot of things I was going to explain. And he left me room to operate in another arena where I need a lot of time. He explained the nature of the trap, the economic trap. Now I can go back and historically explain how you got into the trap.
Okay.
How we as a people, and African people, the world's richest continent, the world's richest people, how we became so poor. Because we have been under siege for over 3,000 years, and we are still under siege. Because we have things other people want, think they can't do without, and don't want to pay for. And we have things of great riches that we do not understand. We're walking over diamonds as though it's sand. Walking over gold as though it's dirt. What attracted other people to us? Our great culture riches, our great material riches, and another thing we've never made the best use of, our great spiritual riches. We never made the best use of our spiritual riches because we began to play with spiritual toys invented by other people.
Yes.
Speak on it, God. And we have religions invented by other people, invented to control us. Now, I'm not talking about don't be a Christian, I'm saying don't be it that way. We belong to fraternities and waste a whole lot of money and time and don't understand that the whole concept masters and fraternities were taken from us in the first place. I didn't say don't belong to these Greek fraternities. I said make them African and use the African base of it, other than the Greek base of it. It came from us in the first place. At the base of all of this is what? The loss of confidence. The loss of the fear that you couldn't do it. The mind being imprisoned and thinking we can't do it. Now let's deal with a late 19th century, early 20th century. A Caribbean person came here from Jamaica. He had 3 initials in his name, but nobody ever knew his name. A.E. something Shaw. All right, now, Shaw came from a country where he had seen his people collect taxes, seen his people police constables, schoolmasters, and the like. Petty administrative jobs. Why did he see this? Because the English, who are pathologically lazy,
Yes.
didn't want to do the clerk job. So clerkship in the Caribbean islands became a thing of black domination. While in this country, clerkship became a way for upward mobility for the poor whites. So having seen your people in clerkship in large numbers, you begin to lose confidence in your ability to do what you haven't even tried. This whole thing is hinges on the loss of confidence and your eyes not seeing certain things that make you believe that you can do it. Now, Shaw took the examination. He passed. The paper said whoever gets the highest mark will get the job. Collector of Internal Revenue for the Hampshires, the richest part of Long Island. Now, when Shaw took the exam, he asked black Americans, why didn't you take the exam? The black American told him, look, man, even if we took the exam and made all kind of marks, they ain't gonna give us the job anyway, so why should we bother? All we're talking about is confidence. Caribbeans lie to each other and lie to us. We lie to them. We haven't come together because each one of us are reacting to a different form of oppression in a different way. He was a majority. It makes a difference. If you are a majority, even though you are a slave, you have a different psychosis than a person who is the minority. It's a different makeup. We argue over the relative merits of slave masters when none of them have any merit. You know, my slave master was better than your slave master. You know, slavery in the Caribbean was commodity. That's a damn lie. Slavery in the Caribbean started. Slavery in the New World started in the Caribbean. They used to take the slaves and break them in the Caribbean for the American market. Just like you're breaking a horse. Slavery was more brutal in the Caribbean. But they reached a point where the brutality had to be toned down so that it could survive. But there's a majority. And this Englishman they sent over to do the basic mechanical work became so lazy because he had access to all those women, all those lush and plush, and he was just saying yes to temptation till he just gave out a energy. Some of them just died. You know, you might as well drink all the water and try to drink all the water in the sea if you think you got to say yes to every temptation. There's too much out there. Well, now, they developed in the Caribbean a free man based on his skill. Now, Shaw came out of this concept of doing things. And when he passed that examination in New York, he kept hounding them. Your paper said the person who gets the highest mark gets the job. And eventually, this man bugged him until they gave him the job, and he was collecting internal revenue for half to all those rich people. Now, after he became became collective internal revenue, a black tax collector in the United States who knew just as much about tax, even more, because he knew biblical taxation. Charlie Anderson became collective internal revenue, collective taxes for internal revenue per district, Wall Street. What I'm trying to show you is that until you see someone looking like you doing something or aspiring to do something, you don't have enough confidence to believe that you can do it. The Charles set in motion the confidence that led to not only the early migration to Harlem, but the first Harlem political renaissance under a black bell captain, Ed Lee, and two black geniuses, Charlie Anderson and Ferdinand Q. Moore, who found the United Color Democracy, a black arm within the Democratic Party. Now, if you find a black arm within the Democratic Party today, someone's going to call you racist, and you're going to cringe and accept it. And all you're doing is looking out for yourself. The first thing that you do was to find a Jewish cell or arm within everything he gets into. And if it can't do anything for the Jew, he's getting out. He's not going to apologize for it. You can call it racist instead of sky to another shade of blue. He's going to look after himself. I call this the essential selfishness of survival. At the bottom of our loss of confidence is that we played with other people's cultural toys and forgotten the better made cultural items of our own making. Now, we began to lose image and confidence with the first invaders of Africa, the visitors. You got to study the visitors. But the Hebrew invasion, but no black people hung up with the Bible. They won't deal with the Hebrew invasion. They won't deal with the invention of the Bible, a Jewish survival book, and a damn good one. They won't deal with the fact that most of us copied from Africa, and that the African original was better than their copy. They won't deal with any of that. They won't deal with the early stories of deluge or flood stories. And all these stories were there 3,000 or 4,000 years before they got there. They copied it and made it their own. Adam and Eve's story was already there. All kind of flood stories already there. We don't read our best writers. We don't read John Jackson's pagan origins of the Christ myth. Everybody got their Christ story. Everybody got their creation story. They're surely entitled to it. This is everybody's creation story. It's everybody's homogeneous story. You go through Africa, Somalia, they said that we are the most homogeneous in all Africa. I said, good, thank you. Go among the Hereros, they said the same thing. I said, thank you again. I don't deny anything. I don't tell anyone they tell no lie. Everybody have the responsibility of creating an image of themselves that makes them feel good about themselves. This is what we have gone wrong. We've gone wrong in the whole thing of image about ourselves. When the Hebrews came into Africa hungry, we fed them, we clothed them, gave them spades, gave them our women, and they copied our skills and our folklore and made it their own. And when the first invaders came, they joined the invaders instead of the Africans who had befriended them and saved them from starvation. Yes. You ain't gonna deal with this. Because you think that you're dealing with the people of the book. He said, the people of the book. Book? What book? They gave you a book that was yours in the first place. Yes. The same as the people started searching for a holy grail that wasn't lost in the first place. When other people begin to change your image of yourself, they destroy your confidence in what you can do for yourself. When these foreigners, the Hittites, begin to attack the culture, begin to interfere with the gods, or imitate, or do their imitation, It was interfering with our confidence. And this went on because the Africans have created for over thousands of years confidence in themselves. What you forget that for most of the days we have been on this earth, we were an independent, self-governing people doing everything for ourselves that needed to be done, collecting all of the taxes, keeping the roads intact, moving the dynasties wherever we wanted to move. This went on for thousands of years, and we didn't even know that there was a European in the world. So when people bring all of this nonsense about European bringing intelligence, first place you got to know the chronology of history. When was the Odyssey and the Iliad produced? About 1200 BC. That's the first book to come out of Europe that showed any intelligence. And that's a piece of folklore by a mythical character called Homer. But then Africa had thousands of years of civilization behind it before the Europeans showed the slightest intelligence by producing a book. Had long before the European wore a shoe or lived in a house with a window. Africa, we don't go back and pull on this, but then when you got to deal with the age of Europe, the last people to come into the mainstream of what is called civilization. In ancient times, there was no Europe. Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible 80 times. England is not mentioned once. Germany is not mentioned once. Scandinavia didn't exist. And what makes you think that these were the first people? Only two nations now called Europe mentioned in the Bible, Rome and Greece. Look at your geography. Where are they located? On the Mediterranean. When people make a case for Egypt not being a part of Africa, I can make a better case for Rome and Greece not being a part of Europe. Because there was no Europe. Now, the subject is facing the 21st century, and are we ready for the 21st century? Now, I can answer the question negatively, and we can all go home, but it won't do any good. But if we're not ready, and we're not ready, why are we not ready? Because somewhere along the line, we lost confidence. We lost the confidence in the rule of nation. We lost the confidence in nation management and nation development. When you lose this, everything else goes. And when a foreigner comes into your country and changes the color of your God, and you accept it, violate your women, and you accept it, you don't punish it, they got you in a trap. Change the way you dress, change the way you think, and change the image of God. But we are the only people who worship the image of God that don't look like us. I'm not saying don't be spiritual. I'm not saying don't have a religion. I said have one that complements you or leave it alone. Religion is deification of a people's culture. Do the religion we worship deify our culture or deify us? I'm not saying don't worship a God, but a blonde, blue-eyed God who needs a haircut hanging in your church. There's no deification of your culture and no deification of your father image. That's right. The God in every society looks like the father in the home. Why is it that you make an exception? And I'm saying so long as you worship a father alien to your own appearance, alien to your own kinship and your own color, the black father in the home is going to lack the full respect he needs to be the authority figure to give direction to the home. It's as deep as that. Now, what developed to change the image of ourselves and the image of our deities, make us lose confidence in ourselves and our nation structure? Because our enemy came first from Western Asia. Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. Those first invaders, 1675 BC, Western Asia, shepherd kings, Hittite, and the visitors, the Hebrews, joined, made league with them, and produced the world's first wheeler-dealer politician, Joseph, called the provider, who would have been at home in Chicago. Wheeler-dealer, who could provide. And what could he provide? He had the ear of the king. And who were the king? The foreign kings, not the African king. Now you have to understand what is meant. A king, Joseph dies, his relative dies, and a king arose who knew not Joseph. Who was this king who knew not Joseph? Africa. The Africans are coming back to power now, regaining their country. They owe the Jews no favors. That's the king who knew not Joseph and did not owe him any political favor. And because Joseph's people were collaborators and clerks around the foreign king owed them favor, but the new African kings coming back to power owed them no favor. Now Africa, in its great generosity, mistaken humanity, would say, those who wish to obey African law may stay, those who don't want will have to go. Large number didn't want to obey African law, so they left. They walked in, they could have walked out. Why did they have to go by the sea? Mainly to give Caesar B. DeMille a good script for a movie. There's no proof in the war that they left by sea or had to leave by sea. That was a 16-mile land bridge between Africa and Western Asia. They could have just walked on out if they wanted to go. And the Pharaoh who was supposed to have been drowned chasing the Jews, his mummy's in Cairo right now. Must have rescued the mummy. Because you get so obsessed with other people's book, thinking they are the people of the book. You don't know that you had the greater book before the coming forth by day and night, called the Book of the Dead. In the Book of the Dead become the basis of the Bible. So when you got into their religious trap, their culture trap, you begin to lose confidence in yours. So now, after the recovery and the building of religions, the African had already done certain things. He had already created the female god. He'd already balanced society up. You got a god, you got to have a goddess. He'd already conceived the fact that man came to exist without woman, and man is a part of woman. He'd already conceded that. He was secure enough to let women ride at the head of their army and go as far as their mind will take them without feeling insecure. Then why is it that all of these religions, so-called Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as divided by other male chauvinist religions? While when we divide, every element that went into the making of these religions came out of Africa in the first place, and none of them were male chauvinist religions in Africa. Many temples were built as a celebration of the faith, but many times the temples were too small to accommodate more than 50 or 60 people. So they weren't built for worship. They weren't built for worship because the temple wasn't essential to worship. In an area, the place where people believed that God was all omnipresent, that God was every place, you didn't have to go into a temple to pray. If he's in the wind, pray to the wind.
That's right. That's right.
If he's in the cockroach, pray to the cockroach. If it's in yourself, pray to yourself. That was why, this is why when people call me and I have to come out of the shower or the bath and hurry to answer the phone and say, where were you? I said, I was in my temple. I can turn my bathroom into a cathedral anytime I want to. Just close the door. Want to pray, want to meditate, want to argue, want to look at myself. no mortgage on the house. So now, we, after the recovery, we had 1,000 years of peace. We start building again. The foreigners came back. The Assyrians, 1666. Now the foreigners declaring a war on image, declaring a war on our culture, declaring a war on our custom, violating our women, creating a bastard element that has some problems about their loyalty. If you understand what I'm saying, you'd understand how the mulattoes destroyed the effectiveness of the Haitian Revolution. You will understand why Jamaica today is one of the most stratified countries in the world along color and class lines. You'd also understand that Karl Marx's concept of class does not fit our concept of class because we deal more with status than with class. You can have $1 million and still have no class status in our society.
That's right. That's right.
And you can be poor with a status. Karl Marx could have been well right in his assessment of economics in class in Germany. In urban Germany at that. But he was dead wrong when he made the same assessment for the rest of the world, because the rest of the world hinges on religion and culture. And the economic is tied to that. So class in the European sense is not always applicable to us, because class is not based on money, on financial status. Let's take the case of W.E.B. Du Bois. They had no money. He came from a well thought of family, a well-entrenched family in New England. That his status in the community was that family, its contribution to the general community. Money was not the real object, but intellectualism and class. Now, intellectualism and position within the community. And we got hung up in somebody else's class system. But let's go to now. After the 1,000 years of peace, the coming of the invaders again, first the Assyrians, then the brutal invasion from Iran, Cammus's invasion, 550. And they were so brutal till the Africans cried out to their gods, if you can't send me a liberator, at least send me a conqueror that will have some money. Now, the young Macedonian with a gender problem, Alexander the Great, knocked at the door. He didn't have to knock very hard. The African had grown so sick of the image of foreigners, he's willing to accept a foreigner who promised to be mercy. And he kept his promise. He was a raper, and he was a raid of African granary to feed his army, that Greek army. But in general, he had great respect for African culture. And he wrote his mother and said, he's now at the home of Greek culture. Now I know where Zeus came from. Great respect. The Romans tried to change the image. And we have to study the Romans now. Anti-Christians who kill Christians, kill people for being Christians. Then a degenerate, I'm using my words advisedly, a degenerate called Constantine. Women hanging around the court, naked, fornicating all over the place. He was approached by a group called the Essenes, who told him that you have to get rid of the women, and be more private in such matters. He said, well, all right. Finally, they were vegetarians. So they told me, you have to stop eating red meat. Now, come on, you just take your religion and jump. Don't be fussy. If I got to get, I ain't going to give up no red. So I said, all right. You can have your meat. He made Catholicism, Christianity, the official religion of the Eastern Roman Empire, then it spread. All right. The Europeans, the Romans, wanted an explanation of a religion they couldn't understand and still don't understand and still do not intend to practice. They have adopted it politically, they keep it politically. And when it no longer serves them politically, they will no longer use it. You think Swaggart is a Christian? Baker is a Christian? Is a millionaire actor, performer. Not even a good performer. Show you how naive people are. A lousy performer can milk people out of millions of dollars. All right, now, let's go back to this change of image, because the Romans were confused about this religion. They're still confused. At the conference at Nicaea, they wanted to know how to handle this religion. I'm still dealing with economics. I'm still dealing with confidence and the lack of confidence. They began to change the image of the religion. The image of the saints, all now becoming white. There were certain books in the Bible they didn't want to deal with, like the book of Mary. Because if you read the book of Mary, this tells us one of the so-called lost books. None of them were lost. These are the misplaced books. I got all of them in my house. They're not lost. I read them all. All right, now, the book of Mary says what Joseph said when he discovered that Mary was with child, and he knew it wasn't his child. Thou art a father. Or, I have not entered thee. I mean, how can it be my child? I have no intercourse with it. Now let's bring on the Holy Ghost stove. Joseph didn't buy the Holy Ghost stove. You bought it. Joseph didn't buy it. Now, the Romans who became Christians now declared war on the African Christians. Now, my main point is current. The European never invest energy, time, and resources in anything he can't control. He wanted to control this faith now. He changed the images from black to white. He changed the control of it. He's taken the books out of the Bible that he didn't want to deal with. He didn't want to deal with the Immaculate Conception and other people's concept of the Immaculate Conception. Even today, an African can see a woman with 9 children. She's a good reputation. She got all those 9 children from one man. The African would say that her mouth is sweet. She speaks the truth. Her skirt is clean. Only one man has lifted it. She is a virgin. Now, the African concept of the Immaculate Conception is pure of reputation. She obeyed the customary laws. She respected her community. She is a virgin. Her reputation is intact. But the Europeans' concept of a virgin gave you something that is impractical. They made a woman a virgin that history proves had already had children. You got hung up with that myth. You haven't asked the essential question. How can a woman who had a child previously be a virgin? Because you haven't dug that deep. Now, getting hung up with other people's images in the Roman mismanagement of the faith, because they never intended to obey it, fighting among themselves until in the 600s AD, a camel boy began to complain, talking to his other camel drivers. These complaints led to other complaints. And finally he asked for reform. He couldn't get reform. He asked for making of a new religion, Islam. Islam came into being. You haven't dealt with the phoniness of Islam either, and you won't deal with it. Because anytime a brother joins something, it becomes pure and forever. Something you've had all the time. The fact that it was just born day before yesterday don't mean nothing. We out Pope the Pope and we out Muhammad. We are the pure believers. We are the suckers with everybody's image except our own. And this destroys our confidence in those things that look like us and act like us and think that are to our interests. All right, this religion came into being. It came into Africa, and like all other foreigners, it began to change African images. It began to change African customs. It began to sell women by African, sell children by African women. And it began to propagate a concept that there was nothing of value before it got there. Some of us bought this into the millions. The African bought the ceremony. Two Africans were advisors to the prophet. This is where you get in trouble with the brothers. They don't want anybody to say that the prophet was taught. The prophet was an illiterate. Two educated Africans taught him. Zayd bin Harith and Bilal, the first Mazum, the first to announce the prayer. And when the faith was in trouble, they advised him to send his key followers to Ethiopia. And the prophet said, go to Ethiopia, go to that righteous land where no one is wrong. Ethiopia's reputation was that good. Remember, the Greeks called them the blameless people, favorites of the gods. And anytime they wanted to get somebody off their back, they say, I'm going to tell my friends in Ethiopia, you better leave me alone. That reputation is Ethiopia. The word that was used for Africa long before the word Africa was used. Ethiopianism. Look at early ancient maps. What did they say? North Africa is called Ethiopia Superior, meaning at the top. Central, Ethiopia Central, Ethiopia South. Word Africa wasn't even used. Word Ethiopia was synonymous with all of Africa. And the prophet said on his deathbed, Islam will never forsake Ethiopia. Ethiopia is in distress. No people keep promises to us. And that promise was never kept. Ethiopia's had more problems with Islam than any country now. There's some political reasons for it, but that promise was never kept. Nobody keeps promises to us, and we do not call them into account for having not kept the promise. We make a new arrangement with them without even reminding them that you did not keep the previous promise. So the foreigners' encroachment on us and on our mind destroyed a lot of our confidence in the things that we created. We became players with foreign toys and forgot the things that we made for ourselves. There was a partial recovery after the Africans had gone into Spain and conquered Spain for Islam. I'm using my words advisedly now. A lot of people won't deal with this. The original conqueror of Spain were Africans, not Arabs. The general was an African from what is now Senegal, the Senegambia. Jabral Tarak, Tarak bin Azad, the Rock of Gibraltar is named after him, the hill of Tarak. And there's a book by Alkebu-lanic called Tarak bin Azad, and she said, describing his triumph into Barcelona, she said the army was as black as ink, the general was black as steel. Why did the general look black? He was the only one riding a white horse. The horse was better dressed than the kings of Europe. Silk and brocade. Women in celebration were throwing that garment at his feet. I'd like to see this in Technicolor. What I'm saying is that the image of the African as a manager of power is still intact. For he was along with the Arabs, but with the African in military control. They would control the Mediterranean for 800 years. Europe began to awaken during the Crusades. It came out of the Middle Ages. It had lost longitude and latitude, lost the whole concept. If to put a ship at sea, they wouldn't know how to direct it. A catch of maps fell into the hands of Prince Henrik, called the Navigator, though there is no evidence that he ever went to sea. He began to open schools of navigation, schools of chart making. Into this school went a wayward Italian, not thought about too much by the Italians, who couldn't buy his silly dreams, Christopher Colomb, later to emerge as Christopher Columbus. 1482, 10 years before New World discovery, he was with the expedition that forced their way into what is later called the Gold Coast, later called Ghana, to build a castle, Elmina Castle, the beginning of the great castle building and fortress building to house the slaves they're going to take out. He says in his diary, man and boy, I sailed up and down the Guinea coast for 23 years. Count 23 years back from 1482. So what kind of activity was along that coast during that period? The early Portuguese slave trade. Next time you go to Columbus Day and kick up your heels in the parade, remember, you're participating in a fraud. Because Christopher Columbus was a fraud, a racist. And that when he had killed so many Indians in the West Indies, he advised Father de las Casas to petition Rome for the increase in the African slave trade. Now the African as a laborer is the new picture. Forgotten 3 great states built in West Africa that lasted over 1,000 years. Ghana, Mali, Songhai is a hackneyed, cliched way of approaching it. There's much more to it than that. But these great nations in inland Africa, one larger than the continental limits of the United States, once they began to decline, the European needed a rationale that still prevails. He needed to convince your mind that the world waited in darkness for him to bring the light. That except for him, you would have no light. When he came to West Africa, he too began to change the image of God, the image of culture, the image of enlightenment. And he made a lot of us feel that he did us a favor to enslave us. But we had lost not only a nation, we had lost confidence in ourselves. And this loss of confidence caused millions of us to be brought to the New World. But we began to develop, along with the loss of confidence, a revolutionary fervor. We revolted longer and harder than any other people in world history. We revolted to keep from getting on the boat. We revolted on the boat. We revolted to keep from getting off the boat. And many of us in large countries like Brazil and even parts of the West Indies bypassed the auction block and went straight into the woods and stayed there and formed entire nations there. And yet we would learn all of our history. We don't tell our children with rough few tools without a single gun. We took on entire nations and built nations. Palmaris lasted 110 years. Bahia lasted almost the same. So we didn't just passively sit and be slaves. We haven't made the serious study of Brazil that we need to make. We haven't made the serious study of the Caribbean islands that we need to make, mainly because Caribbeans are telling a whole lot of nonsense about slavery being mild. They're using the wrong image. There used to be a corporation between both one and the other. But what we lost, I'm going to sum this up so you can throw some questions at me. The harder the better. I'm a veteran of conflict anyway. All right. Now, what we lost was the idea that we once ruled a nation. And if you rule a nation, you got to understand, you got to rule all parts of it. Now let's get to a current mistake that reflects this. The fight against apartheid. It's not about apartheid. Apartheid ain't no big deal. They can destroy the apartheid tomorrow and they'd still be in control. They still have the power. Because first place, all the mines in South Africa were so sunk at what previously had been African mines. Then now they got deep equipment, they can dig deeper. Now, if you're going to fight against apartheid, first place, that should be your fight. If you're going to take over South Africa, you have to make an inventory of what is needed. If you're going to shout nation time, you have to make an inventory of what goes into the making of a nation. You're going to fight against apartheid. It's a diamond producing country. How many diamond cutters do you have? How many diamond marketers do you have? How many master plumbers do you have? How many is needed? How many you have? How many you got to get? And all the time we've been fighting against apartheid, which is a phony issue. We could have trained enough cadre to take over South Africa overnight. And if the Russians or the left was for us, they could have smuggled 200,000 silencers into South Africa. We'd have first begun by killing the police force. We'd have knocked them off overnight. What you forget is that oppression depresses you to the point where you lack the ability or lack the nerve to touch another person. Too much of our blood is on the hands of other people. We will never be psychologically free. We will be imprisoned inside of ourselves until somebody else's blood is on our hands.
That's right. That's right.
You talk left, right, politics, you talk anything you want to. But this is a fact of life. Nobody frees themselves until they get up enough nerve to draw the blood of their oppressor. Until you do that, forget it. Forget it. Make a deal. Now, if we want to make a deal with the United States, all we have to agree that we agree to be second best. We'll never apply for the best job. We'll never apply for the top position. We will be the best, second best in the world. They would dress us up, arm us, and we'd go through our subduing people all over the world. And they would feed us well, clothe us well. They send ships to bring us airplanes. So long as we're America's flunkies. And they will use us to subdue African people too. And there are some of us who will go. We have to understand what we have to gain in the world is the concept of nation structure, nation management, concept of self-reliance. We have to go back and look at this argument between Du Bois and Washington. It wasn't even an argument at all, but a difference of opinion. It was never a problem of Du Bois or Booker T. Washington. W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. They were both right. Du Bois was right politically. Booker T. Washington was right educationally. Only Du Bois was premature. He wanted you to go into politics before you learn how to manage your own community. Washington was putting first things first. Survival. Learn how to make your bread, make your shoes. You live in a brick house, you should own a brick yard, know how to manage it. You should know how the basic business of your community should be managed by you. The one economic status that you needed, had to have was your community. We could employ 1/3 of our people furnishing goods and services to each other. And we forget this point because we aspire to certain little white-collar petty clerk jobs. Wasn't paying that much anyway, but it made us feel good. We didn't dig ditches. So what's wrong with digging a ditch? It pays decently these days. Booker T. Washington was trying to get across to you that the man who lays a tile in a bathroom correctly makes more than a college professor. Why, he didn't say everybody lay tiles. Everybody be college professor. If somebody got to lay those tiles. And he's going to get a decent salary for doing it. So why shirk away from it? Somebody got something go wrong with the plumbing. Somebody got to fix it. Have you had any plumber lately? It's almost like having an audience with the king. Will you please come and fix my faucet? And having fixed it, will you please be merciful with your bill? There's something they rarely ever do. What Booker T. Washington was trying to do is to train us for nationhood. Self-reliance for nationhood. This is what Garvey was about. Now, everything Garvey advocated except one item was already here. We was already going back. Bishop Turner's Back to Africa program was much better than Garvey's Back to Africa program. Chief Sam's Back to Africa program with the ship was just as good as Marcus Garvey's, if not better. Then what did Marcus Garvey bring that wasn't here before? The concept of nation reformation and African reclamation, the concept of being in charge of everything as of being assistant to somebody else who's in charge. It came at a right time. Okay, now, let me conclude it. A few years ago at Bank Street College, where I had the previous year made the major address, I was now just a participant, and they had a little time lag. Some kids would go come on and dance, and the CBS would come in and film something. So they asked me, would you speak extemporaneously to hold the audience, you know, until we get these other things ready. And I was talking to Reverend Lawrence, Georgia Lawrence, I think it's past now, Brooklyn, Bethany. No, one of the churches in Brooklyn, I forgot. Anyway, he's a well-known black minister. And I was talking about what Martin Luther King did not learn about Mahatma Gandhi. And I said, Martin Luther King was never a Gandhiite and would not dare to be. Martin Luther King was a Christian theologian, a man of high principles, a man who had too much morality to even be like Gandhi. Gandhi was an East Indian nationalist, and his mission was to free India by any means necessary. If he had to lie, he would lie. He would do whatever he had to do. But he changed the economics of India. When he came home, the movie got it wrong, but when he came home, he was dressed in tweeds in the hot summertime. And when his Indian friends began to tell him, why did you buy the tweeds bought from England? And all these British graduates importing tweeds from Africa and wearing them all summer. They begin to laugh at it. How can our economy thrive if you wearing tweeds imported from England, supporting the British worker? And all the fabrics in India are imported from England. So he sent his people back to basics, back to the spinning wheel. He took off all these Western clothes. I never wear anything I don't make myself. It's not made by my people. When the British charged too much for salt, he told them salt was as free as sand. He led them to this famous salt march to the sea. King would never have done this. And all his fasts were fakes. He said, I'm not going to have any solid food, a little goat's milk. If you know goats and know goat's milk, you know you can sip goat's milk, some of the most nutritious milk out there, and you can sip goat's milk and live indefinitely. You ain't never gonna die. So Gandhi was an actor, good politician, a liar. He no politics for any of this. His idea was to free India. Gandhi never even said a good word for the Chinese. God had no time for other people, not even his own Asian nation. It was India, India, India. Martin Luther King never espoused anything like this. Now finally in the talk, I said if Martin Luther King would one day pull off all of his clothes except his underwear and tell his audience, I will never wear any clothes my people don't make. I will never eat any bread that don't come from one of our farms. If you want me to have wool, buy some sheep, grow some wool. I will never eat use anything that didn't come directly from our own people. And at this point, when I made this point, the two women came to this podium and walked me down. I said, enough of that, no criticism. I said that if we said that our beloved ones will not be buried in a coffin we don't make, we'd have to open 10 coffin factories at once. And we would take the coffin industry away from the mafia.
Yes.
All right. Yes.
Now I'm talking about something that's easy to make. If you look at a coffin, where they put all that silly decoration on it, the coffin not even made of good wood, even second-rate wood. And a second-rate carpenter can make one. So now, you're not talking no genius. You ain't got to go to university now. Don't need no degree. Up in the Rites in the West Indies, that time they used to carpenter, the local carpenter made the coffins. And in Africa, the local carpenter made other local carpenters. So you go to the carpenter, you get a coffin. You measure the person, he knows what size coffin to make. He makes it. He got no coffin factory. When the ladies led me down, he said that this is a memorial in honor of Martin Luther King. It was at Bank Street. And we don't want that kind of criticism. I said, I wasn't criticism. Martin Luther King could have set in motion a whole industry. Now, if a minister say, I won't wear nothing people make, you know how we want our minister to look good. We done went to that sewing machine and made him so many nice suits. He won't have time to make. All of this is contingent on the fact that we need confidence in ourselves, confidence in our institutions, in our ability. We need to regain what we have lost. We need to study history because we have to understand what we have done in order to understand what we are doing and what we still have to do. We have to understand what we have been, what we are, and what we still have to go, and what we still have to be. My concluding remark is that we can change the world if at first we change ourselves. Thank you.
We're going to take the question and answers now, so if you have any questions, please come forward to the microphone.
One thing, here's a rumor going around there, and the Arabs help perpetuate that. I see that rumor going on a lot. In the Holy Quran, it says that Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet. But they spread the rumor that he was the first Muslim. In the very book that they got through him, says he was not the first Muslim. It says that the first man, human being, was the first Muslim. Right. That's what the book they got said. But they go on, they say Prophet Muhammad was the first Muslim. They perpetuate that, and they know better. Then there's another thing. The only thing I could see that we have to be in Islam that I have disagreements with is the idea that they are establishing another book they are trying to put up on a level somewhat next to the Holy Quran itself. And that book is the thing of Hadith. They could establish Hadith on a level where they got to be used in conjunction with the Quran. Then it would put it in the same level of Christianity. It would make it somewhat a political religion. Quran not political, Hadith is.
What's the question?
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay. I can understand it. Some of the brothers have said that God made the first Muslim, his name was Adam. I find that utterly ridiculous. Because how can you make Muslims before there was the religion? The religion was extracted from several religions. It came into being so fast it didn't even have time to create any original saints. It was part of it came from Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. Many of their saints are the same. Many of their deities are basically the same. And I think Dr. Ben's work, The African Origins of Major Western Religion, is very good on Islam. I know that a whole lot of the brothers can't stand Dr. Ben's interpretation, but it is a good scholarly interpretation. John Jackson has written a book called Christianity Before Christ. It also has an interpretation of the origins of Islam. He also written another book earlier, been reissued, called Pagan Origins of the Christ Myth, which dealing with the appearance of the Christ story in many other cultures. Also, good. But everything we get into has to be pure. It has to be the first. It has to be all comprehensive. And the brothers quite forget the damage Islam has done in Africa.
Yes, yes.
It was Muslims from the north that destroyed the great nations in inner Africa. It destroyed the nation of Sangay.
Yes.
It's the Muslims in the Sudan right now are literally destroying the black non-Muslim population right now. And not a single Muslim scholar or otherwise would say anything about it. We have scholars who are Muslim, but we have no Muslim scholars.
I think I respond to that. I know like Sangay, Mali, the ancient African empire, they were Muslim. And I know Islam means the way of God.
They were not Muslim.
No?
And the truth is the royal family was Muslim, so they were listed as Muslim. As for Ghana, Ghana was destroyed by the Muslims. Destroyed by a Muslim house coming from what is now Mauritania, then called the Empire of the Susu, led by a prince of that house called Abu Bakr. He destroyed that country in 1076, ruled it for 10 years. Then he had to pull his army out of Ghana, ancient Ghana, to help his co-religionists in Spain. Then under the military rule of the Almoravides, before the challenge came from the Almohades. And in the process of this move, he died. Ghana gained her independence, but none of her ancient glory. Ghana must be listed as a state whose structure was destroyed by Islam, and not a state that was Muslim. I heard a Muslim scholar that I have a great deal of respect for said that Ghana, Mali, and Sangay was all Islamic states, and that is not true. They were nominally Muslim, but they were never 100% Muslim. Islam never spread to the total population of any of these countries.
Thank you very much, sir.
Dr. Clarke, I'd like to say that I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. It's a very simple question. I'd like just to know where I can. You talked about the camel boy asking for reform. I'd like to know where you got your source from.
Source from major works written on it, but a great deal of it came from. There's a collection of books called The Story of Nations and religions of the world. And I've also read English translation of works written in Arab, written by Arabs, translated into English. The best basic books on Islam comes out of all places, Pakistan. And they have created a greater Islamic literature than Arabia itself. Now, the story of the Prophet Muhammad is in at least 100 books. And it's basically the same.
They were to tell you that allow, because from my understanding, a lot of people would say he was given this knowledge from God, and no one ever taught it to him. And from all the books that
well, that's the way you never say that a deity was taught. Now, we have to understand the creation of gods. All deities are inspired by God, in spite of the fact that no outstanding deity, except Buddha, who came from the middle class, were formally educated. And there's no proof that Christ could read. There's no proof that Prophet Muhammad could read. It was inspired by God. I mean, what God?
So you're saying?
I don't. I tell you another thing. No deity has a grave. They all ascend in them. So to create a religion, you've got to create a mystique and a mystery. I am not less. I'm a very highly spiritual person. I used to be a Baptist Sunday school teacher. I hold all organized religions in contempt because they're people by hypocrites. Go ahead, teach. I don't need nobody needs to teach me the 10 Commandments. I have enough common sense to do that. I ain't gonna violate my neighbor's wife anyway. Because I got one. Stealing requires too much time. And I'm gonna kill anybody unless I feel I can basically get away with it. It don't make sense. Sitting in jail don't make no sense. I got too many things to do outside of jail, so I don't want to go. But I got enough common sense to conduct myself in such a way that I don't need no minister to preach no 10 Commandments to me. Besides, they were taken from Africa in the first place.
Thank you.
Dr. Clarke, once again, thank you for the enlightenment. You, I know, can talk very eloquently about going into the 21st century. And we are on the fringe of going into the 21st century. And my concern is that we are worse off going into the 21st century than we were coming out of maybe the 14th to 15th century.
Coming out of the 19th century would be good. You'd be more correct if you said coming out of the 19th century, less than 50 years after slavery, we were better off psychologically, economically, and educationally than we are right now. That is true of the West Indies, that's true of Africa, that's true of the United States, that's true of South America, that's true of the black position throughout the world. We were much better off. We are so psychologically confused right now. Even if an economic apparatus was in our hands, the competence to manage it is ours. We came into the 20th century boldly believing in ourselves. The Africans believed in themselves because for 100 years they had kicked those Englishmen behind. All kind of wars, and they had run them. They didn't go to England under the chandeliers and the cocktails and get all confused with the smiling British woman. They didn't get all confused about that. They picked up their spears and their shields and went to the field and kicked back.
Right. Well, you partly answered the question. My concern was what suggestions, or would you reflect on where you see Africa, what's happening in Africa for the 21st century, based on its present condition?
First place, we have to realize that Africans did not come to power after independence. They were Europeans in black face. There is not a single government in Africa modeled after the African concept of consultation with the people. Modeled after the African concept of morality and cause. the African concept of evidence, and the whole concept of the council of elders that we imitate here without understanding. That an old man literally became a judge by the fact he lived long enough to understand. And he didn't have to go to law school. He lived 50 years in the village. He knows the laws of the village. He knows the people of the village. You have a court, he's the judge, because he lived long enough to be. Now we got some farmer people. I've had 2 encounters with the civil court, and I would rather be tried among the worst savages on earth.
Thank you.
Because justice has nothing to do with law. Justice has nothing to do with whether you violate or no custom. And I mean, as we go into the 21st century, if we don't gain confidence in ourselves, the ability to manage our own community, the ability to choose a good curriculum for our children to study by, if we don't do those essential things, we might as well just make a deal or go out of business as a people. Because otherwise, no people are going to survive until they first protect themselves, which is not only a right, it is a responsibility. We have to start with our community. If you're going to learn how to run a nation, you just start how to run a candy store. If you're going to make a locomotive, first see if you can make a safety pin. Work from that. Remember now, all you need to make 10 locomotives is 1 locomotive. Take 1 locomotive, break it down. Say, Johnny, you make the wheel. Matt, you make the motor. You make the stove pipe, engine pipe. You make the other mechanism. You assign all those different parts to different people and put it all back together again, and you got a train. You need 1 example. Now, it's the case, the story I tell often about a Japanese came to MIT, was humiliated, and had a bigoted teacher who always said, you Japanese are always imitators, you can't do this and you can't do that. The Japanese didn't argue with him. He didn't call no demonstration. You call him a dirty racist, MF, nothing like that. Got ready to graduate. He said, I'm going to give you something I bet you Japanese cannot imitate. Gave him a $1 Ingersoll watch. There used to be a $1 watch in America that worked. Gave him this watch. Can't imitate that. He went away. 3 years later he came by and asked the teacher, gave the teacher one of the Japanese version, and then he asked permission to address the class. And he said, yes, you know. He said, the professor challenged me to imitate the $1 Ingersoll. I've got a pocket full of the Japanese version of the Ingersolls, and I'm selling them for 50 cents, and I'm making 17 cents profit. He didn't go home. He didn't call no demonstration. He didn't call the Japanese equivalent of the NACP. He went home, went to the drawing board, broke that watch apart, reproduced every part in smaller dimensions, put it back together, and he had a cheaper watch. Now, if we did something like this instead of holding so many demonstrations and blocking the UN and all that stuff, that's going to work. Yeah. Pick up a textbook and learn.
Yes. You spoke to the ancient Hebrews when they entered into Egypt and how they were nurtured and taken in by Mother Ethiopia or Egypt.
Egypt.
Yeah, and I was wondering what was, to your understanding, the racial, origin or the ancestry in today's term of the ancient Hebrews.
Well, they came out of the world's first melting pot, and this was almost 1,000 years before the Greeks and the Romans came into the area. Whoever they were not what we now call white or European, whoever they were. The Canaanites that they destroyed, obviously an African people that had been been established. Well, the confusion comes in that you assume that the people, the white people today calling themselves Jews, are direct descendants of the biblical Jew. He has no relationship to the biblical Jew at all. These are Europeans converted to the faith.
All right.
The biblical Jew is probably extinct. There's probably no one alive who can say directly, specifically, for sure, he's a descendant of a biblical Jew. You can assume this, but there's no proof of it. In the first place, when the Romans dispersed the Jews, the last of the Eastern Jews, 70 A.D., you got to study, there were no Jews of consequence in Europe at the time. You got to study migration patterns. Some of them went to Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East, but a large number of them migrated into Africa and lived in ancient Ghana. There's proof of this. They lived in ancient Ghana, and from about the 1st century to the time of the invasion of ancient Ghana by another African people, the Musis, what is now Burkina Faso, formerly Upper Volta. The Musis ran the country for about 300 years, up until 770 A.D. Then the Musis, the people, then the indigenous peoples, the Noke, came to power. They expelled the Jews and the Arabs for trying to take over the country. But this is proof enough that Jews and other people can live side by side with Africans without any fear and practice their religion separate from Africans, because the Africans have had a large political toleration and religious toleration. Africans have been very decent to other people living among them because they've always been hospitable to strangers, mostly the wrong strangers. But if anybody want to establish the Jews as the ancient Jew as a white person, I challenge him to bring me the proof. There is no proof that I know of. Anybody want to say whether Christ was black or white? All I say that, was he a Roman? They said no. Was he a Greek? No. So far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the conversation. Whoever he was. Whoever he was, he was one of those other people. Then if people want to argue with that, I said, bring me your proof. Bring me your logic with it.
Yes, I want to, make one other statement. I guess in concert to what you're saying in regard to the logic. In Deuteronomy 28 chapter, the 68th verse, there was a prophecy that was revealed to Moses concerning the original Hebrew people. And in that particular prophecy, in Deuteronomy 28 and 68, it states that his ancient people, the original Hebrews, were to, in the future, because of disobedience, go into a second Egyptian captivity. And this particular captivity would be denoted in that it would occur through slave ships. And this land that they were to be brought in by slave ships, they were to be sold as slaves to their enemies. Now, I just want to make a statement that the so-called imposter Jews, or the Jewish Europeans, nowhere in their history fulfilled this particular prophecy. But there is one particular people that does fulfill this particular prophecy. One other question. You mentioned and you stated that when Constantine, the European emperor of Rome at that time, converted to Christianity.
Eastern Rome.
Yeah, of Eastern Rome.
Eastern Roman Empire.
Then he consolidated it later. But when he came into, when he converted to Christianity, and you said at that time, my understanding was that he changed the gods from black.
No, I said that this was changed at the conference at Nicaea.
Yes, to...
That was 332 A.D.
Right. Okay. That he changed the gods,
The priest did.
well, I mean, under his authority.
It was under his authority that the conference was called.
Okay. But the point that I'm just trying to make was the God at that time of Christianity changed from black to being European?
The answer is yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Dr. Clarke, I was reading a book by Shona McGavine, I believe that's her name, called Garvey Lumumba.
I know the book and I know the person. Go ahead.
In the section about Lumumba, they talked about when the UN troops and the Belgian troops were in the Congo. Lumumba needed extra help, so he asked his friend Kwame Nkrumah for help. And when he sent the Ghanaian troops there, they, being controlled by the British officers, actually helped out the UN. And when Lumumba tried to get into the radio station to make his broadcast, it was the Ghanaian troops that kept him out.
The Ghanaian troops under a white British general named Alexander.
No.
In fact, it was the Ghanaian troops that.
Well, what I got from that is that Nkrumah sold Lumumba out. It was over his troops.
No. He didn't sell Lumumba out. He just chose the wrong white general to head a black army. And the general sold Nkrumah out. Nkrumah's intention was to save Lumumba. But his choice of personnel was wrong. I say that Nkrumah didn't even need the white general. And there were able African generals in the Sudan. There were able black generals in Africa that Nkrumah could have asked. He probably didn't have the foresight or the connection at the time to know about them. No, Nkrumah didn't sell Lumumba out. I'm saying there was an unfortunate situation when Nkrumah signed people to something he thought would do one thing and who did another thing. That white general was an Englishman. He was looking after white colonial interests, white commercial interests. Nkrumah miscalculated when he appointed the general. That's not a sellout. That's just a plain mistake. With the best of intentions.
Thank you.
Dr. Clarke, my question has to do with one of the loyalty system and the other of resolving some of the contradictions that exist in African nationalism and Pan-Africanism. To be specific, some of the contradictions that Amos Wilson raised earlier and a few that I have listed here on paper. One would be most of the nationalists who are supposed to be the most enlightened as far as historical knowledge of the community continue to send their children to their oppressive schools. Another would be many female nationalists are single parents or anti-male, and yet they're supposed to be the most clear proponents of understanding the importance of family. Another one is that many male nationalists use their knowledge not to enlighten, but as a tool to attract and later have sex with many different sisters. Another one would be many male and female nationalists marry outside of the race. Another one is many male nationalists abandon their children and do not even provide for them after they leave them. And the last, but certainly not least, in a list of many, many nationalists feel that their message is so clear or correct that they correct that the majority of the people will not comprehend it. So they keep themselves in isolation. But my question simply asks, who are they struggling for if they're not struggling for the people? I know these are many different points about some contradictions, and I know a lecture is probably needed to address all of them. I'm just asking.
I think, let's begin with the last, they're struggling for themselves. They're not nationalists, they're rhetoricians, and very articulate rhetoricians. Many of them are mixed up with the left, and they got some Marxist concept of the family that's alien to the African concept of the family. When they broke our cultural connection with Africa, they broke our loyalty system. Many of them are women's livers following the white woman's concept of liberation. It has nothing to do with our concept of liberation. This is partly why I couldn't buy a Alkebu-lanic, because she was mixed up with a bunch of white nuts, you know, that didn't mean us any good. And so I couldn't see us devoting any time to this. The black woman national will have to understand something. The black man nationalist is going to have to understand too, that there's no place to go except to each other. And that no matter what you hear from white people, no white people have devised a society that will make you permanently comfortable outside of a relationship with your own people. And whatever you think about your own people, ultimately you have to make peace with them or survive. And because the white man has designed nothing for the black woman on a permanent basis except to be a cleaning woman and a concubine. He has no permanent position for you. You're going to have to, you got to make peace with the black man or do without or go another route, which is not advisable. We have to understand something else, is that the slave ships brought no white beaters, no female impregnators, no men slapping women and calling them bitches. The slave ship didn't bring any of them here. They were not that. There was no man deserting women in Africa. There was no man leaving teenagers in Africa. Now, let's look at the circumstances in the society that made the black man what he is, made him become what he is. And let's deal with that society. I don't mean forgive him. A black man that deserts a black woman is wrong. A black man that slaps any woman is deficient in language and got something wrong with his courage. If you can't out-talk her or move out of her way, you're a poor example of a man. I'm saying that a lot of things we inflict on women are unnecessary. Then you have to understand another thing, because the black woman is so mixed up. Her sharp tongue has driven more black men from their home than poverty. Sometimes she's without mercy in talking about him. And sometimes she tells her own children that she laid in bed inside by him, your father is a piece of shit.
That's cold.
Then why didn't you make a better choice? Why did you lay with him and saw a child by him if you think so little of him that you got to demean him in the eyes of his child? Sometimes you get angry with the child and strike him, just like your no good father. Now, even if that's true, was that necessary? Was it necessary to destroy his mind in his image of his father? A lot of things are said from both sides without any thinking at all. And they hurt both of us. And we quite realize that without each other, we ain't got no place to go. Nobody to go to. We must start making peace. We must start getting together as a community. When that woman can't address herself to the situation, there must be men in the community who can set him down and say, hey, brother, you're off base now. The same thing we take in this community and slapping women around, one of them we don't take. You straighten up, you know, or put some space between you and the community. No matter where you go, you're going to support those children, because we're going to find you and make you do it. Yours, you're going to support it. But I think we take too many things to court and not enough things to the community, to our friends, and to our relatives.
witness.
Because the court is dead against you. I had 2 encounters with the court within the last 2 months. I know that the court is the one place where you will not get justice. They like to see you come there arguing among yourselves.
That's right.
That makes them feel, if they're superior enough, they got to sell your argument, they feel that they're superior enough to rule you. That's how the slave trade started. The Africans began to invite the Portuguese to settle some of their family disputes, and the Portuguese end up conquering both of them. Now, if you haven't learned anything from Godfather 1 and 2, is that you never, absolutely never, invite a person not a member of your family to settle a family dispute. Sew up the community drunk, anybody. But you don't invite people outside of your ethnic family into your family disputes. This is something we have to learn. And sometimes we purposely take it outside of the family. This is a form of public humiliation. Both of us got to accept some responsibility for what has happened to both the black man and the black woman. We've like essential dialogue of reconciliation, one to the other. And we're good at making blame, but we're not good at taking blame. Being responsible. I have not answered all of the questions. I could not in any case. But I think left politics have confused a lot of us. Now, I say this critical of left politics. I've been a socialist over 50 years of my life, and I don't think there's any place for the world to go except for some form of socialism. I think you got to take over the modification of capitalism. I don't think capitalism is absolutely all bad. I think its sentiment is bad, its feeling is bad. I think capitalism lacks humanity. But you cannot survive in this world and totally ignore it. I think socialism is old as man. It existed not only before Karl Marx, it existed before Europe. When I'm talking about socialism, I'm not talking about go back and just read Karl Marx and dialectic materialism and all that. I'm talking about go back to the system of social living that existed before socialism. Go back to the system of communal living that existed before communism. Go back and believe in some things that we created that worked quite well for a few thousand years and might work again for us if we update it. That's as close to an answer as I've got. I know that I missed some questions.
Tip, Dr. Clarke. I'd like to thank you for another enlightening lecture as well as the last lectures. And my question is, or you've mentioned really in this lecture as well as other lectures, that one of the biggest obstacles that African people have towards nation building is that they lack confidence. And I'd like to know, what can you suggest to build up this confidence, and what can we do as African conscious people to help our brothers and sisters build up their confidence?
I think we're going to have to start with the children. We could go as far as we can start with our children, building their confidence. Kids set before a TV. Anybody ever told him he could make a TV? They see all kind of white heroes. Anybody ever tell them about the black heroes? Anybody ever tell them about the black heroes in the West when you see the white Western heroes getting the gun right into the sun? Anybody ever tell them some of the greatest? And the original cowboys were black. And many of them, instead of fighting, were sent to fight the Indians, joined the Indians, and several became chiefs in the Indian tribes that they were supposed to be fighting. Anybody tell them that? Anybody tell them about the Seminole Wars, where the army was mostly black? And when African Kofi Abraham fought so hard until the government of the United States said the idea was not so much to stop the Seminoles, but to stop Kofi Abraham, a black man. He went into Mexico and he stayed there for a while, and he came back, and even when he was 60, 70 years old, the government still feared he might return to the Seminoles and start them on the warpath again. Do you know the Seminoles are the only Indians, so-called Indians, who never signed a treaty with the United States? Technically, they're still in war. You know that last Seminole War was because Osceola, the Indian chief, had a black wife. And when he said, they said she was an escaped slave, but when they wanted to come and get, when they wanted to ask him, demanded to return her, he said, come and get her. When they came and got her, his army was mostly black. And the general fighting the army said, this ain't no Indian war, this is a nigger war. Have anybody made a serious study of the Seminole Wars? The relationship between blacks? I think the third chapter in Lerone Bennett's book, The Shaping of Black America, is a fair introductory study to these wars. I think it deals, the chapter's called Red, Black, and something. Lerone Bennett did a whole lot of good work before he became a conservative and joined the Millionaire Club with Johnson. That was a remarkable good writer before, he got comfortable and became Johnson's chief executive and all that. But Lerone Bennett has left us some fine social thought before that. He said that a whole lot of people become conservative in their old age. And I made a serious study when someone in my class at Cornell University, they had called A. Philip Randolph and Uncle Tom. Booker T. Washington, Uncle Tom. I said, study the life of every great idealist and dreamer who lived to be over 50. Study the last 10 years of his life. In most cases, these were years of concession and compromise. And this had nothing to do with race because it goes across all race lines. The one sense of pride that I take in myself is the fact that at 18, I took a principled stand. And I said that if we are going to go left, we have to go left our own way, but our own reason. We cannot tell our people that religion is the opiate of the people, because when we become socialists, the Baptist Church is going to become socialist too. And if the Baptist Church never becomes socialist, we will never make it. I said we needed then an independent road to the left. If we are to go to the left, we need to go independent. Take from capitalism anything we need, or from communism what we need, and discard what we do not need and have no apologies about it. I still think that's a good principle stand. I still think the Marxist movement is poor students of human history and poor students of human culture. That is still true. And I still think the followers of it, the black followers of it, have illusions. I don't less believe in it, I just less believe in their concept of it without taking into consideration. If you look at Russia, right now, Russia's having some internal problems with ethnic groups because it is not seen fit to respect their culture and their religion, which is the preface to their economic state. If you don't understand those two, then you can't understand the third one, which is economic. All right, brothers and sisters, I think we've talked enough. Oh, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Dr. Clarke, I just want to say I enjoy your lecture. It's a privilege to be here to listen to. My question is, Dr. Clarke, you said that before the Europeans was a thought that the Africans had thrived in civilizations for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yes.
So what I would like to know is, where did the European come from? And the reason why I ask this question is because I read that once upon a time on the earth it was nothing but African people. And I believe I read a book by Professor Ivan Sertima, and he said that as Africans migrated to the north to the colder climates, that the pigments in their skin changed and turned them lighter. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that on the island of Ilan, over a period of 600 years, as the light varied onto the lighter, this produced the Caucasian race. I'd like to know, what do you think about that?
I respect Elijah Muhammad, what he did, creating a rough-hewn Islam was digestible to a large number of black people, and it gave a whole lot of black people a feeling of being whole again. I cannot accept his story of the creation of Christ because it's unanthropological and unscientific, but I respect it for just the same. The white is a mutation. If you look at old geography, Africans could walk into Europe from the left and through what is now Western Asia because there was nothing to prevent them from doing so. There was a land that walked out of Africa into Western Asia, right into the back door of Europe. If you look at the fact that the strait wasn't always a strait of Gibraltar, the African could walk across that land bridge right into Europe. And Sheikh Anta Diop has done a small book called The African Origins of Europe. Now Dr. Ben has done a small book called The African Origins of Europe. I think the European is an African whose migration and physical change in Europe took place in Europe, and that nature tends to take away what you don't use or don't need. And let me give you an example. The horse once had 5 hooves. He kept coming down, most of the pressure went on 2. Eventually, nature subtracted to 3, and now he has 2. Nature generally takes away the things you don't need, and nature generally endows you with the kind of coloring you need in order to survive, while nature or yourself puts you down. If the African had white skin and curly hair, he would have been extinct. The African sun would have destroyed him. But nature gave him the color, and gave him the complexion, the melanin, that he could survive. So if you ever hear anybody say something about good hair and good skin, remember, nature, wiser than we are, knew what kind to give each person so they could survive what they happened to settle. And I think nature, in her own wisdom, just saw fit to make some subtractions. I think the African is the mother and father of mankind. The European is just a later day African who lost his melanin. There are a lot of good books on this. One called The Mediterranean Race, and one again, there's a whole lot of books on it. I mean, this is nothing that people have to stand and argue with anybody about.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke. How are you tonight? I would like you to comment on the type of preparation and the amount of time that African people have to look forward to do the necessary creating, working, and building that is in front of us to do.
Well, you can prepare the minute you gain your self-confidence and prepare to rule yourself. That's the beginning. The rest of the building of confidence goes on forever because you have to reinforce your confidence and reinforce your belief in yourself. Thomas Sankara, the late leader of Burkina Faso, went to a meeting of Africans. He held out his feet and he said that I'm the only one here wearing a pair of shoes made in Africa by Africans, from leather from an African cow. All the rest of you got shirts from France, clothes from England. I'm the only one that has enough confidence in our people to wear what they make for me. That was confidence. Once we have this kind of confidence in ourselves, we'll be on our way, economically. Maybe some of the things we make won't be the absolute best at first, but give us time. You don't have to give us a whole lot of time. We'll straighten out the procedure. What we make going to look even better. I think it's just it all goes back to the restoration of confidence and how confidence was taken away by the control of image, cultural image, religious image, economic image. We have not seen our people do the essential things we need to do in order to be a whole people again, in order to have the confidence to control the nation again. We must see it doing it well. 2 nations in the world failed for many reasons. Could have helped us a lot, Liberia and Haiti. Had these 2 nations succeeded, we would have had a role model of an African state that we could use to build other African states. You first got to see it happen in order to gain control of yourself and believe that you too can make it happen. Now there's reasons for Liberia's failure, there's reasons for Haitians' failure, but we can't get into right now because we have to get into the confusion borrowed by the mulatto question and the confusion about in Liberia by a whole lot of people. Uncle Thomas, when they got there, then many of them went there saying that they got to civilize their heathen brothers. If you go to Africa with the idea that you're going to civilize anybody, you're wrong to begin with. You got to go with the feeling of kinship and respect of kinship. You have to talk to the African and not add him or down to him or up to him. That kind of relationship will have to exist. Ghana could have been the new role model. The fall of Nkrumah was disastrous. Mostly because people got to some Africans who had the illusion that Nkrumah was doing them a lot of harm. Nkrumah was making a whole lot of mistakes, but Nkrumah was 10 times better than what they got after Nkrumah. Mistakes and all. And he was the one pan-African president of an African state who wanted to unify all Africa. In Tanzania, we could have had another model. Joseph Nari is a Catholic. When he kissed the Pope's ring, which proved that he had no regard for African gods. I say a cultural revolution is needed in Africa to restore our confidence until we see an African head of state pray to an African God in public, unashamedly. There will be no revolution that will change the mind of Africans and make them believe in themselves again. If there's no other questions, I would like to say that it's been a good evening with you, and I'm glad that I arrived in time to hear Amos Wilson, who made things easier, for me, because there's a whole lot of things I didn't have to say, because he'd said them exceptionally well. In my own travel in African states, especially among Arab and Muslim states, there's a custom that they have when a great teacher comes to teach. They meet him at the gates of the city and request of him, lend us of your wisdom, and bless the wind that blew you here. And after he's delivered his message, on his way out of the city, they thank him for his delivery and said there must have been a good wind that blew you here. And then the teacher's reply is, if I have done any good by being here, may the wind that blew me here blow me back again.
For their marvelous and analytical depiction of our situation today, and for not only stating problems, but giving solutions that we all can understand and practice. We thank Dr. Smalls for reminding us that we were the beginning, and with proper culturalization of our minds, we can create a future that we all can be proud of. We thank Dr. Wilson for explaining the difference between European sexuality and African sexuality, for helping us to understand that we must recapture our African identity, and until we do, we will still act like we are out of our minds. We thank Dr. Yarborough for discussing the breakdown of our family and helping us to see the importance of sharing the knowledge that we have received here and with our parents, sisters, and brothers, and for giving us the word that the key to our mental change is to know ourselves, meaning our total selves, our history. As Dr. Jeffrey says, research our family, learn our past, and our past will enable us to better deal with our future. Hold close that which is dear to us, and we shall never lose it. After that basis was set, Dr. Wilson has introduced a social system, a system for working together to derive a working system in order to benefit us. He has explained that we need to develop the basis and make them grow into our economic power. With that, we can begin to develop the United Nations. Finally, Dr. Clarke says that confidence is our #1 problem in dealing with life as we know it today. We need to understand that nothing is new. The same things that happened yesterday will happen tomorrow until we decide to make our tomorrow what it should be. On behalf of the presenters, Bates, and myself, we thank the Robeson Network, DOS of NJIT, and vendors for coming out and physically supporting this conference on the African American people facing the 21st century. Whereas it may be the presenter's responsibility to present this information to you, it is your responsibility to take it, dissect it, and analyze it. Use what you can, share it with others. Above all, though, either continue to have or establish an example of a strong family. Remember, our children are watching. Hotep, and good afternoon.